A 10-second countdown? We're good to go. Okay. Welcome everybody to the March 1st, 2021 Board of Directors meetings for MSAD 51. For those of you, before we kind of get into the meeting, we have a long meeting, I'm guessing, tonight. We have a lot of things to share, a lot of information to be communicated. You will note that the agenda has been revised. And the reason for that is because when we originally posted this agenda, we had a couple of things. So the pandemic and post-pandemic planning presentations from both Superintendent Jeff Porter and the building administrators were originally going to happen during the workshop portion. We do not record our workshop, so therefore all of that information would not be available to the public after tonight. So we chose to switch up the order, move those presentations so that they are part of the public live stream. And then we also knew that there would be a large amount of public comment around this topic, so we chose to add in a separate public comment right before the workshop so that it follows the information that the building administrators and Jeff has presented in case that answers any of the questions that you may have arrived with tonight. As you all know, we have restrictions on how many people we can allow in the building, so we ask that when you are done with your public comment that you exit so that we have room for other people, as we already have a line in the lobby. So we are here to listen. Tonight we know that there is a lot of conversation and dialogue around the community about getting our kids back in school, and we are all here to listen to that this evening. We don't need to call to order because we are actually in person, or do a roll call. So we'll start with with recognition around student forums that happened, I believe, last Wednesday. And Jeff and Chris Hoffman, I believe, yes, thank you. We'll kick that off.
Thank you, Tyler. Indeed, it's a pleasure tonight to offer some recognition to one student leader here at Greeley High School who has taken a great deal of initiative in leading our student government. Our student government has been in existence for a number of years now and has always been a growing place for students to express their voice on school matters and school issues. And in this particular year, we think that voice is more important than ever. And the student government, under the leadership of Hannah Perfetti, has done an excellent job of working with me and student government advisor teacher Rich Taylor to continuously provide student opportunities for input through ongoing meetings and listening sessions, and specifically student surveys and student forums. And so this past week we had our second major student open forum to solicit their feedback about the most recent student survey, and Hannah also facilitated that discussion. And her leadership has been essential to providing students that ongoing voice and to growing the opportunity for students to share that voice in our school planning. So I do think Hannah has a few words to share with you about that process and her efforts, but I do want to thank her publicly for all that she's done for our school this year.
Thank you, Chris.
Hi, my name is Hannah Perfetti, and I'm a senior. And over the past year, I've had the privilege to work as president of student government. And as this year has progressed, we've had the opportunity to hear student feedback through 2 student forums. So when we begin this project, we start by going over it in large groups, and then we form small groups. And this amazing small group of about 4 students and Mr. Taylor and I organized a survey in which we asked questions about demographics, so what grade, what kind of classes students take, and then questions ranging from mental health to academics to even like what time do you go to sleep at night, because we know that all these things have been changing since the beginning of the pandemic. And then we asked questions about stress levels and things relating to our academic life. And so at the forums, we begin by presenting that data, and then we choose questions that in the qualitative section of the survey students have left for teachers, which is usually a small group, plus Mr. Hoffman, who answer these questions. Questions about contact tracing, questions about why the administration has made certain decisions, and even questions requesting the continuation of certain aspects of online school. We give Mr. Hoffman and a group of teachers the opportunity to answer these questions and elaborate. And then we open the floor to questions and feedback from students and also from teachers, because we understand the importance of communication between those groups. And so we had one in early December, and then we had one last Wednesday. And we believe that it's really important to increase the levels of student and teachers discussing to hopefully better our learning and health needs at Greeley. So I want to thank Mr. Porter and Mr. Hoffman and the school board for recognizing me in student government, and Mr. Taylor. And we've put a lot of work into this, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to share in order to continue the conversation about bettering our school experience. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone from the board want to make a comment? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Hannah, for all your work. I know that the student government is an essential part of the school, and it's great that Chris looks to the student government for that feedback and can work with them. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you. I just wanted to also make note that I appreciated that you involved teachers in your conversations. I think the more that the two groups can talk and spend time, I know that Jeff shared with me I was unable to attend that day. Thank you. Which I was really bummed out about because I was really looking forward to attending, and I hope to attend the next ones that pop up. But I know Jeff had shared that there was really great conversation between students and teachers and really great connections through those conversations. So thank you for taking the time to set that up.
Yeah, I just want to add, thank you, Hannah, just amazing facilitation of that meeting. The topic this past week was concurrent learning and trying to get thoughts from students and teachers on that. Thank you to Mr. Taylor for organizing with you those events for kids and for teachers. It's really a terrific way for students to be able to voice their questions, concerns, and be involved in the process. So it was a great experience.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing about the next one. So our next item is approval of minutes. First, looking for a motion for the February 1st, 2021 minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Go ahead.
Sean McBride of Cumberland. I was not afforded the opportunity to speak the last meeting about the 1214 minutes because it was a virtual meeting and the chair did not ask for comment. These public participation at board meetings rules were also not in effect at the time. They were also never publicly read at any meeting. It took you 4 years to actually follow the public comment policy and then a couple months to change it because I kept calling you out on it. Anyway, Superintendent Jeff Porter, who is for some reason also the MSAD school board secretary, often leads out information in the minutes that the community might want to know. On 1214, items for action, vote to extend Superintendent Jeff Porter's contract. I had asked why they had to approve an extension to a 3-year contract in today's COVID economy, as people in the town were unemployed and businesses are shutting down. This information is public, it's not confidential. Did you folks know that Jeff Porter currently makes $147,724 a year before benefits and $214,883 after? The motion carried 8-0. Vote to authorize the chair to negotiate the 2021-22 salary and benefits. Not everybody knows, but the town of Cumberland employees, all 100 of them, many supporting families here in the town, were not able to get a raise this year, so the town could offset prior chair Kate Perrin's 5% school budget increase from last summer. Now remember, this past summer, the correction on Kate Perrin's mill rate math was off 100%. I suggested here on 12/14 that the chair reduce Jeff Porter's pay and also realize that when the new budget cycle comes around, MSAD 51 now owes the 100 people in the town of Cumberland their back pay and a new increase. I asked on 12/14 to consider MSAD 51 only saying, giving a 1.5% increase in payroll this year so the town gets 1.5, or maybe even gets made up to 3% or greater. Don't say because of the teacher's contract. Those can be negotiated, and that's going on now. The MSAD 51 employees now owe the town of Cumberland employees back pay. For people here tonight watching at home, Superintendent Jeff Porter contract runs through 2024 now.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Are these addressing the minutes that were on the table for February 1 or February 22?
No, because the last meeting, the chair did not ask for public comment prior to doing the vote.
Understood, but two things. I'm just questioning if what we're talking about here are February 1 and 22, and the difference between minutes and a transcript. Now, minutes are not a transcript.
No, but the town of
community
Cumberland minutes are
avails
so much
itself.
more exclusive and inclusive than the minutes that are provided here by the Superintendent Jeff Porter.
Mr. McBriarty, I would agree if this wasn't a recorded meeting, that anybody can sit in the comfort of their own home and hear all
Town
of
of
your
Cumberland
comments.
meetings are also recorded on and on
Okay,
YouTube as well.
my apologies for interrupting.
May I proceed?
I would like you to keep your comments on the agenda items. So that would be February 1st and February 22nd.
Okay.
And your time has,
I'm sorry, I may have interrupted his time.
Yeah, I think so. Probably
Fair
about a
enough.
minute's worth.
fair enough. I will give you 30 more seconds.
Okay. So what you're saying, Kevin, is that I can't actually talk about the minutes from the meeting that you didn't allow anybody to comment to the last meeting?
I would say that in front here, so by having public comment on any topic that this board is able to vote on, is as I look at the agenda here, I see approval of minutes February 1, 2021, February 22, 2021.
Right, but you actually changed the public participation at board meeting policy.
I'm sorry, I'm answering your question, Mr. McBriarty. So to those two pieces of approval of minutes, I think that anything that sits within the scope of those two meetings, absolutely. And then not trying to be difficult here, but these are all recorded. And if it is something that you want to encourage people to read your comments, and certainly I would encourage them to.
Sure, so
take a
just to
look
be
at
clear,
those.
Kevin, if there's a meeting that's online, a virtual meeting, where the chair does not allow comments, and now you've changed the actual policy to no longer include public comment prior to board votes, that seems a little disingenuous to me.
I'm not, certainly not trying to be disingenuous, Mr. McBriarty. I'm just looking at, for this meeting, we're looking at two sets of minutes. Those were the ones that if you could restrict your
Okay.
comments. And again, I apologize.
No,
for
that's fair. I certainly appreciate your take on that. I will close with Jeff Porter is grossly overpaid for the job he does here. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on the minutes for February 1st, 2021?
No.
All in favor? Thank you. And then a motion for February 22nd, 2021 minutes.
So moved.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay, and any discussion? Great. All in favor? Thank you. So we will now move into public comment. As I mentioned earlier tonight, if you do have a public comment that is related to pandemic planning or returning to school, we are asking that we hold those till the second portion of public comment. If there is public comment for any other items or topics, please approach the podium. Seeing none, we will move in. I'm sorry, if you would like to speak, you can approach the podium.
So this is the 3-minute public comment portion? Is that accurate?
If it is not related to returning to school or pandemic planning.
Okay, Sean McBriarty, Cumberland. After 5 requests, we actually got MSAD 51 to stop hiding the secret little group of Equity Leadership Committee. You can now see what the people are doing as radical indoctrination of your children through critical race theory. MSAD 51 School Board is now in violation of federal law. Recently, Jeff Porter, legislators Kathy Breen and Steve Moriarty all failed to denounce Ibram X. Kendi and this tight relationship with USM, now that Gurley has partnered with them, after the previous failings of CCI with Shea Stewart-Belay. Ann Maximowicz is even pushing his book. I have copies of a press release if anybody would like them. Several members of the MSAD staff want to change the policy, just like they did earlier with public comment, so they can flood books to students about the mythical white guilt and institutional racism. It's called MSAD 51 Policy IJJ, Selection of Educational Materials. In this woke epicenter of Maine, the Greeley PTO are going to do a training on how to raise anti-racist white kids. Seriously. Ann Maximowicz and others want to have a BLM week at Greeley. You know, BLM, the Marxist domestic terrorist group, they reportedly raised $90 million from leftists putting signs on their lawns. However, BLM only reported to use $22 million. The other $68 million went to the DNC or lining their own pockets. Black-on-black murder rates are soaring almost exclusively in cities where BLM introduced leftist politicians to handcuff the police. I appreciate our world-class SRO, Kirk Mazuzin, for being here tonight to protect me from many of you up on stage. Being white is not a crime, so stop telling our kids it is. Stop pushing your narrative on our kids, and stop going backwards. All this does is encourage victimhood, turning people against each other, and leads to endless debate over trivia. At some point, liberals need to embrace equal treatment for all, and stop trying to create the 100th exception to the rules for microaggressions, and rules we're all supposed to live by. We already have a mechanism for this. It's called free market capitalism and anti-discrimination laws. Judge a man not by the color of his skin, but the content of his character. That's a quote from Martin Luther King, who would be greatly ashamed of Greeley. Furthermore, all parents who live in Greeley should ask for 14% of your taxes back, as Greeley has reduced its services by 20%. Lastly, this doesn't feel like America anymore. It's unbelievably sad to say this. Freedom of speech appears to be dead, and by motion of this last policy, we can see the school board doesn't want to hear from its constituents. Everyone's walking on eggshells for fear of their jobs, their families, their reputations, fearing they might slip up and say something the speech police, like Ann Maximowicz, might disagree with. Until other parents learn that the group of bullies up on stage don't want to listen to them, you will be playing defense instead of offense. The price of freedom is high and always will be, and it's a price I'm willing to pay.
Your time is up.
Are you? Time to step up, parents, because one day you'll be on your own. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak for public comment? We will move on to communications.
I have a statement.
Go ahead, Peter.
In the early 1950s, there existed a period of American history known as the Red Scare. During this time, certain elected politicians accused officials in the State Department, the military, the entertainment industry, academia, and other American institutions of being communists and traitors. Reputations were ruined, and few had the courage to come to their defense. They were led by a senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy. The culmination of these activities occurred in 1951, when General George C. Marshall, arguably perhaps our greatest soldier-statesman after George Washington, was accused of being a traitor. So great was the fear of rebuke that even General Eisenhower failed to come to his defense. Well, as early as 1950, a senator from Maine, Margaret Chase Smith, in her Declaration of Conscience speech, decried the smear campaigns of these politicians. This was followed by a CBS documentary by Edward R. Murrow denouncing the demagoguery that was so prevalent during this time. Well, it took the Senate another 3 years to finally vote to censure Senator McCarthy, which it did in 1953. With it, the senator and the Red Scare eventually faded away as a sorry chapter in American history. Now let's fast forward to 70 years to Cumberland and North Yarmouth in 1920, 1921, where our own Red Scare is unfolding, as 3 members of our school board are referred to, and I'll quote, as communists, Marxists, and morons. Similar invectives are heaped on our superintendent. These are classic smears that would do Senator McCarthy proud. As school board members, we might not possess the eloquence of Senator Smith, but it's time to state that these statements have no place in what should be civil discourse in the discussion of issues. Now, I want to relate that under the First Amendment of the Constitution, these individuals have every right to make any statement they wish in a public forum. I took an oath to support the Constitution when I joined this body, and I took one when I was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army, which eventually led to a year of service in Vietnam. They absolutely have that right, but they have some responsibility to be civil in their comments. Now, I do want to state publicly that I do sometimes respectively disagree with my fellow board members. While I strongly support our equity efforts and goals, I did disagree with small parts of the language in the June equity letter. I also feel that with the charged political atmosphere that exists in our country, that people are afraid to speak out due to their fear of their families and their economic livelihoods, and divisive rhetoric at both extreme ends of the political spectrum does no one any good. This activity has had economic consequences to our two communities. The public may not be aware that over 50, that's right, 50 Freedom of Information requests have been filed by individuals during this period. During the time when our superintendent and business manager have been spending countless hours in efforts to keep our schools open, they have been diverted from these efforts by the necessity of compliance with these requests. Also, some of these requests need to involve our outside attorneys at considerable expense to our district. While Freedom of Information requests are an important factor in the need for open government, this level of request does students, parents, and taxpayers of our two communities no great service, and some would say borders on harassment. Finally, I want to say that I'm not the most religious person in the world. My theology, to quote Hank Williams Jr., is somewhere between Raising Hell and Amazing Grace. However, last January, Connie and I went on a 2-week pilgrimage to the Holy Land with members of the Episcopal Diocese of Maine. Our guide was a Palestinian Christian and a canon in the Diocese of Jerusalem. We visited the usual sites, but early in the morning, without the crowds, had the chance to read the applicable gospel readings at each site. This was especially meaningful at the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, and in Jerusalem. It culminated with walking of the stations across at 6 a.m. on the final day. The trip resulted in a lot of personal reflection, and those teachings and guideposts on how we should live our lives continue to be relevant 2,000 years later. Maybe they should be relevant in our public discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Is there anyone else that has anything to share during communications?
I just want to say, Peter, thank you for taking the time of putting that together. And I think that we should just be respectful of each other. And we may not all have the same opinions, but we do have the same goal, is to educate our kids and to do the best that all of us can. So thank you.
Mike?
I so appreciated that statement, Peter. I subscribe myself to it. I appreciate serving with you. That was really, I appreciate it. The only other thing I wanted to add is that the targets on our board happen to be Kate, Tyler, and Ann. If you can't tell, they're female. None of the male members have been targeted. That's misogyny right there. And it's politically charged. And, you know, it's not hard to figure out that I'm the chair of the town Democrats. So if this was politically charged, I would think that I would get attacked too. But so I think that there's something to be had and thought of there. So just this whole thing has been just a huge waste of time, a huge waste of the space crisis in this district, figuring out how to get a new building, and so much more. And this has just been a huge waste of time and waste of resources. And I hope the community can just say, enough, it's time to move on. But again, you were so much more eloquent than I was, Peter.
May I have a chance for a rebuttal, Madam
No.
Chairperson?
I will not recognize you.
No? Okay, I'll just talk anyway.
what?
But massages isn't one of them.
I'm not.
Tyler, don't engage, please. And we had asked after public comment for people to leave, didn't we?
I do want to just clarify.
Sure.
Actions are misogynist. No people. I didn't claim people here are misogynist, but the actions absolutely, positively have been.
Thank you.
I'd like to just quickly say something, if you don't mind.
Please.
I've been in the field of educational leadership for 25 years. I was a school principal for many years, assistant superintendent before coming here as superintendent a few years ago. And I have watched all kinds of meetings, all kinds of tough decisions that had to be made, people that were upset, and those are just part of the deal of public service. What is not part of the deal of public service is when certain people are targeted. And I feel terribly as superintendent that we have 3 members of our school board that have been in that situation for the last 8 months. And I apologize on behalf of MSAD 51 that has had to occur. And I am sorry that it has had to occur because it shouldn't have. And I'd like to just say that the level of discourse in the public community should be better than that. And it does take a community to step up and say enough is enough.
Thank you. Anything else? I want to thank everyone for their comments tonight. This has been a really hard year for a lot of different reasons. And what was said tonight is really appreciated.
I also just, sorry. were you-
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I also
Sorry.
just wanted to thank the board and thank you for the statements made and for the other motions this evening, keeping us on task, because I am proud to serve on this board. I am proud that my kids are in this district and one child going to be in this district. We have a lot of really wonderful people here, and I will keep working for every single student that we have in this district, every single resident that we have in Cumberland and North Yarmouth.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, I'd like to move on as we still have a lot ahead of us. I think there's a million things I'd like to say right now, but I'm going to continue on with the agenda. So our next is presentations, which is first with mental health, a response to mental health conversations that we've had over the past 2 months with Greg Marley from NAMI, Maine. And I wonder, Jeff, if you could give us a little background on this.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be able to introduce Greg Marley to the board tonight. Greg is widely recognized as a leader in the state of Maine on suicide prevention. And Greg, I had asked him a few weeks ago if he would attend a board meeting and discuss some of the recent losses in the community and have some dialogue with the board about that and be able to offer some strategies that might be helpful to Cumberland and North Yarmouth during this time. We had an opportunity to have a team call with him a couple weeks ago. Social workers, guidance counselors, administrators were on that call. And Greg kind of helped us through some of those issues, and then we invited him to this meeting. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Bill Shane, the town manager of Cumberland, Rosemary Roy, the town manager of North Yarmouth, for engaging with a number of people on our team and also on their teams in working through some issues between the 3 organizations that we could find some consistent language and help for people who are struggling with mental health in our community. And we also have a team that's being led by our school psychologist right now that's putting together resources internally for our district. But I'd like to welcome Greg to our district tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm proud to be here. And I regret, as I often do in some of the work I do, that I need to be here. This is a hard time. It's a hard time for everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about the stresses of the pandemic on mental health, and not just of your students, but of your community, and some ideas on where to go from there. My background is I'm a clinical social worker in the state of Maine. I've been working in community mental health since the late 1980s in a variety of roles: crisis management, working with law enforcement, and about the past 14 years, primarily in prevention and suicide prevention. That's what I do. And since this pandemic shut us down about March 16th, I've spent a great deal of time working with school communities and school professionals around the state on how they do their work and how they struggle and accept the limitations of the pandemic. And where every conversation starts is a recognition that the adults are as impacted as the students. The school board members are as impacted as the school staff and the school students. So it's impacted us all. Our daily schedule, our access to basic needs, particularly until we figured out how to hack the system a little bit. For many people, the finances and the impacts on finances continues. How we act, how we do our professional work, and for everyone, access to care, health care, mental health care. And what I see, I do a lot of polling in the presentations I do around the state, and everyone feels what is shaken a lot is their sense of safety and their sense of hope. And I think we're really, at this point, we're in a place where more than anything else, we need to look at how do we increase hope. So for youth, it's all the things that are carried by their parents and the adults, and perhaps even more so because they're more vulnerable in some ways than their adults. So their daily schedule and structure, their out-of-home supports, particularly for those kids with special needs, special learning needs, how do they access those supports? Obviously, for many of your children, access to peers, peer interactions. And what I'm hearing over and over again, that sense of uncertainty. First we're in school, then we're out, then we're in school, then we're out. The pandemic ebbs and flows, and we can rationalize it, but can our kids? So that uncertainty is there, and their sense of safety and their sense of hope. And in my work around suicide prevention, the loss of hope is what scares me the most. So one of the things that has been positive in this, some of the stigma around mental health and accessing care for mental health is breaking down. I love this cartoon. It says, you know, at least having anxiety made me feel special. Now everyone has it. And that's true, and we'll get to there. So I want to start out before the pandemic. And this is results of the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey going up to 2019. And one of the questions, or three of the questions asked, are about seriously considering suicide, planning a suicide, having a plan to means, and committing or attempting suicide. So in 2019, overall of our high school students, over 16% of them said they seriously thought about considered suicide in the past 12 months. 13% had a plan, and just under 9% acknowledged making a suicide attempt. In terms of symptoms of depression, 2019, 23% of our male students in high school and 41% of our females acknowledge being sad most of the time, at least 2 weeks in a row, to the extent that it compromised their ability to function. So that's before COVID. So let's look at what happened since then. And most of our data is really about adults, because kids are hard to survey, really hard to survey. So this is a shows the difference between signs of anxiety and depression disorder pre-COVID, which is 2019, and post-COVID, January 2021. So about 11% of adults prior and about 41% now. But let's dig a little bit deeper. Again, we don't have good data about kids, but we do have good data about young adults. This is results of kind of what's called the Household Pulse Survey. It's been a rolling survey ongoing throughout this period of time. And among many things, they ask about anxiety, symptoms of depression, sleep disturbance, and levels of suicidal ideation, that seriously considering suicide. And this is for boys or males are orange, females are blue. And I'll show you some data kind of across the lifespan, but the most significant impact were those kids just out of, just into adulthood, 18 through 24. So the rates on that left-hand side, 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8 are 20, 40, 60, 80%. So between 40 and 45% significant anxiety. About the same moderate depression, and about 75 to 80% mild depression. And about 70 to 80% sleep disturbance, and just under 40% seriously considering suicide. And this is males and females. This is the difference between those who are in college, so college students likely, and those who are not in college. Just about the same. And historically, those kids who are not college bound have, well, in terms of suicide death, half the rates of those who are in college, and significantly more mental health. And now in this pandemic, it's about the same, because everybody's affected. And the final piece that I think is important for all of us who are a little older in this room is the levels of depression and anxiety. You can see from the left to the right is 18 to 24, 25 to 49, 50 to 64, and over 65. So from 56% to 49% to 39% to 29%. Now, if we had the data on adolescents who are school age, where would it fit? Where would you think? That leads us in a direction, I don't know, I'm really thinking that probably 18 to 24-year-olds are impacted a little more strongly because their ability to adulthood has been impacted. So what are we going to do? What are the drivers and what can we touch? Certainly social isolation, isolation from supports. Those who find their supports at school and are not finding at home. So stressful and unhome safe environment, particularly when we're going remote. Clearly that uncertainty, that unpredictability about the future. I'm talking to school professionals who are saying, kids who I have seen, completing their FAFSAs and taking the steps toward collegehood are not doing it because they're not saying what they're saying. What's the use? Anxiety. Those missing key milestones, and for some kids, like for some adults, those milestones are hugely important. And I always, in my work, worry more about those who have underlying trauma and underlying existent mental health issues and vulnerabilities. So, I'm thinking we've got hope coming, but we're not there yet. And that's kind of the backdrop here. What are we doing to support that? The first 6 months of this year, we did not see a greater number and rate of suicides. I am seeing the flood bursting over the dam over the past 2 to 3 months. And I'm really worried about what the rest of this year is going to look like. I'm seeing really increasing rates of people who need hospitalization and can't get it. People who are hospitalized, suicide attempts, and kids who are disappearing into substance use. So we're doing a great deal of work around the state, both virtual and face-to-face. And in the middle of this, in April, we started a teen tech support line to try and find one venue where kids could reach out and connect with somebody if they're not finding that at home. It's not a crisis line, but it's available noon to 10 p.m. and staffed by young people who are supervised by clinicians. We're seeking and receiving funding to expand the number of youth mental health first aid trainings we're doing in schools and out, and adult mental health first aid trainings in communities. I'm really hoping that this school system in the next year or two brings sources of strength as a peer-based peer support program. I know you've been chewing at it, but it's been so challenging to make decisions in this pandemic. So how can we work? And how can we recognize the cost of this pandemic on the adults in the community as well? I know you guys have had way too many suicide losses over the past 2 years. And how do you work through the grief, and how do you build resilience in your adult community at the same time you're doing it in your student community? NAMI is willing certainly to partner with this community to the extent that we're possible, and we're always open and available for calls and people looking with support navigating the mental health system. We are not going to therapy our way out of this right now, because frankly, therapists are full. We need to really bring some creativity. We need to engage our communities. We need to engage the support systems that are available to us. And this is a community that has means. So how do you support and create those? And I'm not talking about means only money. I'm talking about means in intelligence and education and creativity, because that's what it's going to take. And I am very open to any questions you have on this. Would love to hear them. Yes, sure. She's asked me to put up the peer support text number.
If anybody has any questions.
It is 207-515-TEXT, or 8398. So we don't need to put it up.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to the board for questions or feedback. Sometimes it takes a minute to compile. You have.
One of the things I've done in my work, starting in about 2003, was to work with school districts in the aftermath of losses. And over the past 6 or 8 years, broadening that out into more community losses. So, roll at it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming out here on such a beautiful night for driving. I'm so glad that you took the time to talk about this. I'm glad that it's recorded. I'm glad that you talked about the numbers that are important to people. It's unprecedented, obviously, right now. And there's a lot of our students sitting in their own rooms, doing their own schoolwork, not having somebody to talk to. And the piece that you talked about and the illustration that you put up about removing the stigma, I think is absolutely everything, or a long way toward everything. Because if we were treating an injury, a stress fracture, a torn muscle, anything like that, then that becomes something that people are very willing to talk about, even when they don't understand what it is or what's causing it. And I think that there's a great opportunity to continue to make it more comfortable for every one of our students, every one of our parents, and people in the community that just don't have someplace else to turn. Your last piece up there of putting up the website as well, perhaps there's some folks that can volunteer their time and skills and efforts to trying to ensure that people are getting the resources that are most necessary. Thank you very much for doing this tonight.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Mike, and then maybe Jennifer?
Yeah, I really, really appreciated this presentation, and definitely hits close to home. I have a 10-and-a-half-year-old at home who during the pandemic definitely went into bouts of depression. And it took us a while to find a therapist for her to talk to. And thank goodness we did. It's been a godsend. But my question is just, and it's okay if you have no idea how to answer it, but so there's a whole focus on treating the individual person, treating specific people, but how do we start to treat a whole community?
Well, that was the question that came up in the meeting that Jeff held with some of his clinicians. And what I'm saying, it takes more than the school district. I've worked with some communities trying to really address more of a cluster and to support resilience, and it has to work with the school and beyond the school, definitely including the efforts from school. But in the suggestions I had and what I've worked with before is other area support systems and agencies, churches, Boys Club if you've got one. How do you get creative? So let me give you an example of something that we're doing. It's actually scheduled for next Wednesday up in the greater Rockland, Camden, Rockport area. They said, you know, we're struggling here. We've got folks that are struggling. What can we do? And I've been doing these coping with COVID conversations. And I said, well, let's do it for the community. Because right now, what the focus is going to be, all right, moving forward, how do we build hope? How do we engage in what is really, statistically, looking better? And so right now, as of earlier this evening, we had 25 co-sponsors. Churches, all the schools in the region, law enforcement, town offices, the Outmain, the youth group in the area, you name it. People stepping forward. And what we ask, when you're co-sponsoring, we don't want your money. We want your support. We want to bring people there. We want your voice in the conversation of how we creatively bring resources. And I'll do a presentation in that session, but a lot of it is going to be about people talking about how and what they're willing to offer into the community as support and resources. And that's the creativity. And I think that, you know, if we're engaging everybody, because we live in Maine, and no one in Maine looks forward to a free lunch. I learned that when my wife and I were diagnosed with COVID back in April. And we got quiet. And I put a post on Facebook that says, you know, playing with our kittens while we cope with COVID. And it made me realize how many people read those damn things. Because people started reaching in, delivering soup, loaf of bread, offering to do our errands, getting groceries for us. And I realized, initially I was reluctant to accept that help. And I said, I'm doing them a favor because they can focus outside their needs and give to something larger. And how do we harness that across the communities? There are many people who are doing okay financially. There are many people who have a good, stable context, and they're doing okay emotionally, and they're ready to give back. And maybe I'll climb off my soapbox.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
I think you answered a lot of my kind of reaching out in the question about, I think we really need to just look and check in on each other as a community and our students, even the ones that we think that are doing okay. Because I think this time is very isolating to everyone. And thank you for taking the time to kind of bring this up and have it recorded so people at home can see it as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ann?
And I think the only thing that I would want to add is, you know, I do appreciate that COVID is making it easier for some people in our state and in our society to talk about mental health and how we're feeling. And then tied to that, I think for people to really consider if medication would be something that would be helpful and to talk to their primary care provider for just, you know, even to try a short course of something to help get them over the bridge.
Madison?
I just want to appreciate this for a minute. When I first applied to be on the board as a student representative, one of my big things was I cared about mental health. I cared about the mental health of myself, my peers, my friends, my family. I really wanted to kind of think about what does the board do to help mental health, because I care. And to hear, to see these statistics about adults, young adults, even possibly students, and how poorly they're doing because of the pandemic, it hurts to know that I, myself, and a lot of my friends and peers are in those statistics of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And to hear that someone like you is taking this initiative to care, it's very, heartwarming to myself to know that people are out there really trying, and that we as a board are going to move forward with that. And I just want to thank you for that as a student.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to say I really appreciated what you said about that a lot of what you did was a presentation. I think you said it was up in Rockland or down east somewhere. And you did a presentation, but what really was meaningful was the conversation that happened in that space. And I think sometimes when we look at this topic, it feels very daunting. We don't know which way to go. But the simplicity of having conversation, even on Facebook, about being able to share that you were playing with your kittens, is something we can achieve. And so I think knowing that we can reach out to the other community organizations, our town council and the churches and all of the other community groups that we have, we can create that dialogue. And I just appreciate you kind of simplifying it down to some of that. I know this is a very complex issue, but having the ability to have these type of conversations is something we can do, and we're doing it right now. So I really appreciated that.
And people want to lend their voice. We did another evening in Calais, Maine, after a series of suicides. 95-ish people on that Zoom. I have never seen a Zoom chat stream more active, with ideas, resources. It was astonishing. And they're taking that forward from that conversation to put some things together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to thank Greg for being a resource to us. I've actually had a chance to hear you before, many times actually, on different areas, and I know that you've been a resource to many people in the state during these kind of difficult times that happen in communities. So thank you for being there and just being kind of steady for the state of Maine. Unfortunately, these things happen, and it's just good to know that there is a terrific resource out there. Your organization is amazing. And I appreciate your lending your hand to our district and our community for, which I know is not the only time that you've said that you'll be there. So thank you very much, Greg.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to move into the second part of our presentations, which will be led by Superintendent Jeff Porter about pandemic and post-pandemic planning. Jeff, are you planning to go to the podium, or are you doing it?
I'm going to start it, I think, here.
Okay.
And then we have the principals that will be.
But you're using this back wall. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So tonight, I will be starting the presentation, and then will be followed by all the principals, the four principals of the schools, and the leadership team there. And we'll be talking about two different parts. One is the current pandemic status with regards to MSAD 51, and then later I'll come back after the principals have had a chance to talk about what it would take to go green this year. I will talk a little bit more about what's ahead in terms of the post-pandemic and looking beyond the pandemic. But we're going to start tonight with the pandemic itself and where are we. Obviously, some of this information is information that you've already had, but I just want to reiterate. The New York Times just this weekend, yesterday, in fact, was quoted as saying the country's vaccination numbers have started to increase again, which is a good sign after a decline caused by severe weather, but federal health officials warned state governors against relaxing the pandemic restrictions saying that the recent drop in cases and deaths could be leveling off. And in that same article, New York Times said that Dr. Fauci has echoed warnings that more rollbacks at state or local levels would be unwise, and that the country remains in a very precarious position. It's very important when the chief health officer for the country is making statements like that. I think it's important that we pay attention to what those are. In the state context, in the state of Maine, on Friday, I was in a call, as I am every Friday, with the superintendents in Cumberland County. Joining our meetings every single week is a representative from the Department of Education and from the Maine Superintendents Association. And on Friday, a statement was released by the Department of Education from the Commissioner's office saying it is essential that school districts across the state of Maine continue to implement plans that adhere to the 6 requirements for returning to in-person learning instruction, regardless of their county's designation. So each county gets a green, yellow, or red designation. In all counties right now are in green, which is good news. However, the state is saying that we must still follow those 6 requirements. The requirement that we are following right now, but we're following it only because we have 50% or so of our students in on any given day, is the physical distancing in facilities requirement, which is a Department of Education requirement that comes from the CDC. Adults must maintain 6 feet of distance from others to the greatest extent possible. Maintaining 3 feet of distance is acceptable between and amongst students when combined with other measures outlined in the list of safety requirements, including masks. 6 feet of distancing is required for students while eating breakfast and lunch, as students will be unable to wear masks at that time. We've been eating in the rooms, so this actually, it applies to us in the classrooms. We certainly have not tried doing this in the cafeteria. Going to green now. So you're going to hear in a couple minutes from the principals talking about what it would take to go green now or soon during the current school year. I'm just giving you a district outlook. Our district has been CDC designated as outbreak status. That means all of our schools, we have 4 schools in the district, have been considered to be in outbreak status. It means we have multiple cases that have been going on for a great length of time at this point. Between September 8th and March 1st, today, we actually had 3 new active cases today. We have had 65 total cases, and that doesn't include individuals, just cases. 1 case, so 65. We have 7 active cases as of today, March 1st. We have 58 resolved cases. In Falmouth, there have been 21 total cases in the Falmouth schools since during that same period. And in Yarmouth, there have been 24 cases. Falmouth has the same student population as our district. Yarmouth has about 500 students less than our district. So because we're in outbreak status as of January 22nd, and the CDC has not notified us that we will be leaving that status anytime soon. It's serious when your whole district is in outbreak. Some superintendents in the state who have been in that status have closed all of their schools for a period of time. In our district, we've chosen the in-person model as much as possible, and we have an amazing staff that have made the staffing and cobble it together. Our administrators, our nurses, our teachers, our staff has really pulled together to make sure that we can preserve in-school learning despite the fact that we have a very high total case count in our district for the student population that we have. So in terms of quarantines, our district has had to date 985 individual instances of individual people being quarantined, some multiple times since September 8th. We have 104 today active quarantine cases, and we've resolved 881. By comparison, and I don't have the number from Falmouth, but for Yarmouth, they have around 300 total instances of quarantine to this date, just to give you a comparison. Getting to green now, here's what it would take. In our district, what it would take is that the Department of Education would need to relax the state social distancing or they're not guidelines, these are rules. There are guidelines and there are rules at the state level. This is a rule, there are 6 rules. If you don't comply with the rules, you could lose your funding, and that's part of the law, or part of the executive order. These guidelines or rules currently prevent district from allowing students to be less than 3 to 6 feet in proximity. We have done the math. We have done all of the space studies. We did that at the beginning of the pandemic, and we cannot bring all of our students in and meet this guideline. In order to get to green right now, the district and each individual school in it would need to be removed from the CDC's outbreak status at this time. They have given us no indication. In fact, they continue to tell us that our case numbers are too high for us to be removed from that status anytime soon. In order to get to green right now, the CDC would need to rule out the impact of the B.1.1.7 variant, which is expected to become the dominant strain of COVID by the end of March, and that's according to the Maine CDC. In order to get to green in our district, a full staff roster would have to be available at once. We have many, many staff who have been on leave intermittently or full-time since the beginning of the school year under federal law for childcare and medical reasons. We would have to have all of those staff return and be required to return this school year in order to make green work. In order to be green, our district would need access to more space, including more modulars. There is not a lot of space in this community that's available to the district, and space is only part of the issue. The staffing is more important to us than the space. But space is an issue as well, and we are already using all of the available space. When you came into this auditorium, you would have seen desks out in the lobby of this center. This center is used day in and day out. This auditorium is used day in and day out. The lobby is used. Kids eat lunch in the hallways in different places in all of our schools. They are in conference rooms. We have special education programs that have moved into conference rooms, small group rooms, classrooms. We have moved kids and teachers all over the place in order to make it work. And in order to go green in our district, the vaccine would need to reach herd immunity. And at this point, there is no indication that that will occur during the current school year, according to everything that I've heard anyway. Herd immunity status around vaccines, the governor released the schedule for the state of Maine in terms of vaccination rates. And you can see the one that I highlighted is very important. All of them are important, but July and beyond is when ages 29 and under are expected to begin the vaccination, and there is currently no vaccination that's been approved for children, ages 12 and under. So that's something that they're still working on. I'm sure that we'll get more information about what that means and when that will be available. But as of today, this is the information that the governor has released. She released it on Friday. So at this point, I'm going to ask each building principal if they would explain, because we've had a lot of questions, and I think they're important questions that we want to try to answer and explain beyond what I did for each school. What would it take to get to green this school year?
Thank you, Jeff. Can you come down from presenting so that we can share our slideshow, please? Thank you. So I'm going to share just a few brief introductory remarks, and then we will age through our schools and explain the various things that it would take for the district to, quote unquote, go green during the spring of 2021 at some point. And I just want to begin, again, for those of you that don't know me who are here, I'm Chris Hoffman. I'm the principal here at Greeley High School. And I want to start by acknowledging that the times we're living through are remarkable and difficult. We are incredibly grateful for the work of our families and our students in working through those challenges, as well as ever so grateful to our staff for all that they have put into making learning as meaningful and possible as can be this school year. We were asked to present this evening about what it would take for us to be green, if you will, offering instruction to all of our students in the schools. And we're going to articulate that as best we can. Given the time we've had to prepare, we had originally thought that we'd be discussing post-pandemic planning this evening, and we'll do our best to articulate the needs of our schools to open in green this spring. Indeed, as Jeff articulated, we have been operating under a certain set of guiding assumptions about what we could do within our schools. And each and every day we're open with students, we rely on following these health and safety requirements, those being the daily completion of a symptom screener, which we have shared over and over again with our students and families, which has been instrumental in several instances of catching students and staff members with just minor symptoms and preventing them from entering our facilities. As Jeff mentioned, we are required to adhere to those physical distancing guidelines, that rule set forth by the state. All of our students and staff are required to wear masks even after vaccination. We would, of course, continue with the same hygiene protocols, and we would, to the greatest extent possible, continue with the same traffic flow patterns to avoid student contact in our hallways. With broad brushstrokes, and we'll provide more specifics by school, going green now would require space, as Jeff articulated, would require staff. It would likely require changes to our school schedules with the possibility of reduced instructional time in certain buildings. And this shift would require a considerable amount of time and effort to adjust to that new normal, given the change in how the day-to-day would work. And on that note, I'll turn things over to Mabel I. Wilson School and Principal Sally Laughlin to get us started.
Good evening. My name is Sally Laughlin, and I'm proud to have the honor to be the principal of Mabel I. Wilson School. I also just want to acknowledge, as I'm sure everyone knows, that as one person, I do very little for that school. Our secretaries were up early this morning finding out who could come. Our nurses were contact tracing all weekend. Our staff have been on email all weekend checking for status and asking how they can be best prepared. And my assistant principal, Corey Muncie, has more than once stepped up and taken the lead as I have been involved in other family matters. So just want to be aware that this is a united effort. And I also should just say, we have seen the parents as partners this year. There is absolutely no room for anything but partnership in a pandemic, and we have greatly appreciated how everyone has worked with us as we've discovered our way. So tonight, I'd just like to speak for a moment to that wonderful thought of going green and what will it take to do this with the current regulations. So as Chris mentioned, we have a space issue. As we measured our classrooms, and let's just focus on the idea that the children, as in other districts, are 3 feet apart, and in the front of the room, there's space for the adult to be 6 feet apart, which is not currently how we're organized. We have classroom limits of 16 children in a classroom. Currently, we have more students than that in some of our hybrid classrooms. And so that will require us, when we think of regular ed classrooms, to acknowledge that we would need 3 more regular ed classrooms to accommodate those class sizes. We have been living as best we can to expect everyone to keep their mask over their nose and to stay 6 feet apart of everyone else. I don't think that's the conversation this evening. I think the focus this evening is if we could go green, it would be presuming we are having students 3 feet apart. In addition to the regular classrooms, needing 3 additional classrooms, some of our allied arts programs would also need additional space. Their classes are larger than 16, and they cannot accommodate them in the small space that they currently are using with half that number. But that's not all the allied arts. We think the phys ed program can work just fine. We have 2 different art rooms. One of them is large. So we just want to be very careful and nuanced that we've gone space by space through the building, have measured it, and have asked what would this mean. In addition, we would need more space for special education. I just have to take my hat off to Julie Olson and the entire special education staff who have done an outstanding job this year of figuring out how to provide programming, special education services when students are home remotely. This is so outstanding for the children because when they're face-to-face in school, they are accessing the core programming and not being pulled. It has also helped us because you can be working Zoom in 3 different families' kitchens along with 1 child in front of you in the classroom, and you haven't violated any space regulations. If we had all of our children back and we were working with those same special education groupings, we would not be able to keep them all in the special ed spaces that we currently have. And our best estimate at this time, as we said, we started this thinking just a few days ago for this purpose, is that we need 1 additional classroom for special education services to be provided throughout the school day. In addition, we provide other types of programming for students. Response to intervention is when we are helping students who are not special ed students to receive extra support. There will be need for additional small spaces for them. And finally, right now, we have these small cohorts who are 6 feet apart in the classroom. They are able to have lunch without masks in the current yellow zone configuration. If we were coming green, we would need to figure out how to break those cohorts in half and have them supervised so that there are 9 children in the classroom or 8 children in the classroom eating with a supervisor, and the other children are waiting or in another area. So just a little bit about space. When we think about staffing, Corey and I have been thinking about this a lot because we are preparing for 3 maternity leaves this spring. And since our ad went out in January, we've had 2 responses. It has been very difficult to get people to respond to positions such as a substitute position in a school setting, people with credentials during this pandemic. At the current time, based on our estimate of additional classrooms we'd also need 3 additional classroom teachers to be added to the school. We would need to figure out with those added allied arts classes where that allied arts staffing would come from as well. Special education, as we have children in different rooms that need services at the same time, we would need to add special education staff members, and our best estimate is 3.5. Nursing, we are very concerned about the increase in potential contact tracing and the work of our nurses to keep everyone safe. We believe that we would need additional nursing support if we had over the 700 children coming, 613 children coming back. In addition to that, we have 54 remote students that we are not presuming are part of this model. And as we are adding classrooms, the way our classroom teachers get a break in their day is because we work with an ed tech team, and one ed tech member serves 4 classrooms to provide response to intervention instruction, as well as breaks and coverage for the classroom teacher. We anticipate it would be in our interest to have an ed tech added as well for those classrooms. As you would imagine, and I think others have alluded to, our schedule would need to be adjusted. One of our open questions is how we'll safely bring all students into the building and safely have all students leaving the building. We believe that right now we have about 150 students who are being parent picked up and dropped off every day, and a similar number on the bus. If you double those numbers, we believe we will need additional time in the morning and afternoon to safely bring children in and have them leave the building. We believe that will impact the instructional day that's available. Another thing we'll have to think about is how our allied arts classes that every classroom other than pre-K participate in, how that's scheduled to be adjusted with those additional classes would fit in a daily schedule. We are just beginning to ponder how we could manage lunches for all these children in supervised spaces with 6 feet apart without masks. And we obviously have our outside playground areas, but I don't think that's the biggest conversation. So what are some of the things that we know we'll need to do in order to go green? As mentioned, we'd need to hire the staff. Another thing that we just would like to bring to the fore in terms of time sensitive is that 3 different times since last June, we have ordered classroom desks to respond to having students socially distance. Unlike some of the other schools, Mabel I. Wilson for a number of years have had children sit at large tables in groups in their classrooms. Our best estimate, and I'll show a picture in just a sec, is that we would need, I think it's 438 small desks or small tables as we've been purchasing so that each individual could have that 3 feet of social distance and there would still be room to move between and among the desks in the classroom. So that's kind of an immediate need. Obviously, there are many vendors, but the folks we've been working with, there's a 10-week lead time for purchasing desks. Let's see. Another concern we have that just is something that would have to be done is we currently have class sizes, when you combine the 2 cohorts, some of them are over 16. The thought of changing placements for a kindergartner who's known their teacher and their classmates this year would be a reality for some classes because we'd have to reconstitute placements in classes to create new right-size classes. That's obviously something we could do, but isn't something we'd recommend for small children. We'd have to move allied arts classrooms and create new learning environments. As mentioned, all of this change is just work, but it would be a master schedule that would be revised to look at when are we really starting and ending, how are we going to fit in the lunches, what about special education programming and how it impacts students' access to the regular program, and all the other types of schedules we have. If anyone has a staff member or a colleague at Mabel I. Wilson, you know that our multi-purpose room serves 2 purposes right now. It stores every last beloved item that children are not allowed to touch this year. So if you go in our multi-purpose room, you'll see dollhouses and globes and blocks and all these wonderful things that we have had to commit to storage in that what was the cafeteria, as well as the large tables that, like a kidney-sized table that just would fill a room and only 1 child could sit at it. We'd need to clean out that storage so that we'd have a more flexible space for allied arts programming. And finally, we realized that as we hire staff members, we'd also have to remember about their technology and making sure we're prepared for every space to be an effective learning space with a projector, et cetera. And just finally, just to help see why we would need desks, I know it just sounds absurd. This is a 3rd grade classroom and a picture I took this morning. We were using, what we've been doing this year is we've used the typical classroom furniture that's been available and we've supplemented it with the little desks. We would need, and if we were going to fit 16 students into that classroom at 3 feet distance, we'd also have to be replacing some of the tables and the hodgepodge that we have in our classrooms because there would not be the floor space to accommodate that current approach. So thank you for your time. I look forward to questions later, and I just really appreciate this discussion. Next up, I'm pleased to present Carol MacArthur, principal of Greeley Middle 4-5.
Good evening. I apologize in advance. There will be some redundancy in the things that I share, but I was looking at all of these overarching topics from the lens of 4th and 5th grade. So for starters, thinking about that 6-foot distance between desks, our classrooms currently accommodate 10 to 12 students. If we reduce to the 3-foot distance, we gain an additional 4 desks. Given that all of our students need to be facing the same direction and the teacher needs to maintain that 6 feet during instruction, I would anticipate that we would need to double the number of homeroom classrooms to accommodate 100% of our students if we wanted to maintain the integrity of our classroom placements. We could do with fewer additional classroom spaces if we reassign some students to new classes, as Sally had talked about. I would say that would not be my preference. Our small group space for 4-5 is limited in a typical year. It's no different this year. We have small groups that are working at tables in the hallway and outside the library. I feel like we could probably get by okay with the current use of our small group space, but we would inevitably run into some challenges with small group instruction and testing. For our allied arts, we feel pretty comfortable that we could accommodate 100% of our students in PE and library if we had additional classroom space. It is likely, though, that the table dividers that were built for art would not be deemed sufficient for distancing. The tables are rectangular. The partitions are in a section of 4, so I don't believe there would be enough room for students to sit side by side, even with the partition between them, and still maintain that 3 foot of distance. Our STEM and music classrooms would definitely not accommodate a full class size, so a prediction around 2 to 3 more spaces for allied arts. Another option might be to have art, STEM, and music go into the homerooms for instruction. Library is already doing this, which would free up 3 spaces to be used for other purposes. Our resource room program has 4 staff members sharing 2 classrooms. Our behavior program has 6 staff members sharing 1 classroom. To maintain appropriate distance with all students back in school, I believe that we would need at least 2 additional classroom spaces for these programs. Anyone who knows anything about the middle school and sharing 2 different schools under the same roof, grades 4 through 8, and 5 different schedules, we share a lot of spaces throughout the building, and our success of sharing those spaces is highly dependent on our careful crafting of schedules. If some of our larger spaces, like the library, the gym, the cafeteria, were repurposed as instructional spaces, we need to reconsider how programs would be impacted. Our lunch and recess schedules this year have required that we assign zones for where kids can play when there's overlap between the younger and the older grades, to the point where we actually switch days of the week when 4th and 5th graders and older middle school students are allowed to use the playground structures and basketball and foursquare courts. One of our greatest challenges with space will be maintaining 6 feet when students are eating. Sally talked about this. Mari and I did a little bit of math together today, and to use the cafeteria for lunches, grades 4 through 8 would require just under 5.5 hours a day to maintain distancing and gathering size limits. This is obviously not reasonable, so students would need to continue to eat in their classrooms. In terms of staffing, assuming we add the additional almost 20 classrooms, we would need staff to either teach or supervise those students. If we reassigned all of our regular ed techs
academic specialists, and full-time substitutes, we could probably get by with a dozen new staff members. This would all but eliminate our reading, writing, and math RTI support, however. Reassigning these staff would have additional implications that are not fully fleshed out yet, including duty coverage and filling staff absences, which all of these people currently do. If we hope to maintain the quality of our programming and not reassign these folks, we'd be on the higher end of needing about 20 more staff members. Sally mentioned it's likely that our nurses at the middle school, we have two, one is full-time, one is part-time. They could probably manage the day-to-day responsibilities and daily care, such as med management. However, working from the assumption that having twice as many students in the school will increase the contact tracing workload for our nurses, we would anticipate that we would just need some additional support for that, particularly outside of the school hours. Of course, it seems to have happened that a lot of our contact tracing happens on the long weekend and over vacations. It just seems to be the way it's gone. I don't anticipate needing additional special education staff since they've been doing concurrent learning with students in person and at home since September. However, we do have two unfilled ed tech positions in special education that we've not been able to fill this year. We've been able to make do, but with all the students back full time, we would need to fill those positions to have adequate support in our special education programs. In terms of our schedule, in order to maintain physical distancing on buses and on the campus, I would anticipate our arrival and dismissal procedures would need to be adjusted. Our current lunch schedule runs from 11:40 until 1 o'clock. Assuming that students will need to continue to eat in the classroom, we would need to extend lunch earlier in the morning and later into the afternoon. Recess would take some additional scheduling finesse to ensure that all 5 grade levels have access to our outdoor space. We need to coordinate our master schedule with grades 6 through 8 to account for our shared spaces and make sure that there are not too many students passing through the halls at one time. In a typical year, our allied arts teachers see all 300 plus students in the course of a week. This year, in order to limit exposure, we scheduled their classes on a 7-week rotation, reducing the number of classes that they teach at one time and still providing students 2 rotations with each of our allied arts. I expect that we'd need to rethink this approach to be able to accommodate all the necessary changes that I've talked about so far. And candidly, I do believe that all of these adjustments to our schedules would have an impact on our instructional time. So some additional considerations, again, apologies for a little bit of redundancy here, but if we were able to secure additional space, we would need to quickly get about the business of hiring the additional staff needed for either instruction, supervision, or support. Much of our classroom furniture was moved to storage before school started to accommodate the distancing requirements. Desks and chairs would need to be moved from storage to additional spaces. A number of our classrooms, as Sally talked about, usually have tables. Those are also in storage, and they don't really lend themselves for maximizing classroom space in this environment. Since those classrooms are using the extra desks from their neighboring classrooms, we'd need to purchase, I'm estimating, about 100 desks for the additional classroom spaces. Staff would need to have time to thoughtfully plan for the increased pace of instruction. Currently, we have our essential standards mapped out for most subject areas through the end of the school year. Teachers would still need dedicated professional time to collaborate on identifying critical skills and planning meaningful instruction. And with 100% of our students in the school building at one time and the possibility of concurrent learning happening from different locations within the school building or a remote school building, we need to ensure that the network could handle that load. Additionally, we need to consider an increase in distance learning equipment and time for more training in concurrent learning. Sally referred to these as just, the work we need to do, and I certainly agree. But from my initial assessment, these felt like important things to consider. And then I think the last point that's really kind of stuck with me over the last few days thinking about going green is, once we are green, merging the cohorts would require some time to build a sense of community, similar to what teachers do at the beginning of a school year. Our current schedule would accommodate this without any instructional impact, but if we implement extended arrival and dismissal times and lunch and recess times, teachers would need to take class time to do this important work. And of note, we really have experienced, thankfully, very few behavior incidents this year due to the smaller class sizes and the very structured way we go about our day. And some students have actually thrived because of these factors. So we would just want to be mindful to pay attention to the stressors that might go along with going green. That could be for students and staff as well. And then I misspoke. This is really my last point. Lastly, I think one could assume that with 100% of our students in school each day, there would be an increase in the number of students and staff that are required to quarantine when there is a positive case, and subsequently the potential for reverting to red days more often than we have had to. So I just, would be mindful that teachers and families will need to be ready for shifting from in-person to remote on a more frequent basis. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this shift does take our teachers a considerable amount of time to rethink their lesson objectives and their activities, sometimes with very little notice. So the last thing that I just want to say is that I am really grateful to our students, our parents, families, and our staff. I'm really proud of our school. I think we are doing the best that we can with the circumstances that we've been dealt. I know we still have a road ahead, but I do believe that everyone is doing the very best with what they have, and I'm really grateful to be part of our school community. Mari Treblecock will be here to talk about Greeley Middle School 6-8.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to sort of glaze over the things that are exactly the same as what you've already heard and focus on the things that are a little more specific to the middle school. There are a lot of redundancies, I think. So with regard to more space, specific to 6-8, I'm estimating a higher need of classroom space. And I do want to dig into the details on this just a little bit to explain why we would have a greater need for more classroom space. Our regular education and modern language spaces, I'm anticipating needing 21 or more full classroom size spaces. We could potentially use cafeteria space, maybe the gym, maybe the library for some classroom space. That option would depend a bit on whether we offer lunches in the cafeteria, which Carol and I did some math today, and we think it's better to keep lunch in the classrooms because of that extended 5.5-hour time frame that would result. So that might free up some instructional space in the cafeteria. And so those additional bigger spaces might add 6 possible classrooms or sort of pseudo classrooms, but we would also need to think about sharing those spaces with 4-5. It also might be possible to put some classes on a cart in some cases where the teacher travels to a different location to teach a class using other grade level classes. That approach, though, doesn't cover all of our space needs, and so that's how I resulted with the 21, possibly more, for regular ed and modern language spaces. In special education, our resource room teachers already share classrooms, 2 to a classroom, and so they're able to make that work in a regular time because we just don't have that many kids in the room at one time. They're able to make it work this year because, as Carol said, they're teaching some of those students remotely and some of them are in person. If we bring 2 full groups back into one classroom, I'm concerned that that will be a little bit too pinched, and so I'm anticipating needing probably 2 additional special education classroom spaces. Functional life skills, I want to talk a little bit about that space and their needs. This is what they currently have and what they would need to continue having. So they need 3 full-size classrooms, plus 2 small group spaces, and an additional space to provide virtual instruction. Currently, that's happening out of the cafeteria. It could be moved to an office space or a small group space. The reason for this is because of unique regulations in place for students who are not compliant mask wearers. Each student is required to be isolated, and the regulations use that term isolation. They're not isolated by themselves, they have an adult with them, but they have to be in a space away from their peers. We have several students at the middle school who do not consistently wear masks, who require their own isolated instructional spaces, and so those are already allocated to functional life skills and will continue to be if we move to green. So there's a lot of real estate there that contributes to our need for additional space as well. I think we can make do with our small group spaces. There would be a need to be thoughtful about how we're using those spaces during special times, specifically around MEAs later in the spring when we have to do that for small group testing. And then I think the allied arts spaces, I did a little bit of last minute math before coming here tonight, and I think we would need about 4 more classroom spaces by sort of reassigning some of those classes to go to other open rooms while those teachers aren't teaching, and then the allied arts teacher can go. But some of these folks would be moving multiple times a day, so that's something to be mindful of. Okay, so for staff, again, we need a lot more staff. We need approximately double the number of classroom teachers for modern language, allied arts, and our typical core classes. And again, the reason for this, it's either teachers or it's staff. So I'm estimating 29 teachers and staff, and additionally some allied arts teachers. So I want to, again, the devil's in the details with this one. So it's a function of the need for social distancing. We need to keep our students apart in the classroom. So I'm going to use Pete Gillingham, who's over here. His first period class has 19 students enrolled in it. That is a relatively small class for the middle school. Our average class sizes are 21-ish in 7th and 8th grade and 24 in 6th grade. So a class size of 19 is on the smaller side of typical. There are 8 students in cohort A in that first period class and 11 in cohort B. If we open in green, the distancing rules are still in place, so we'll need 2 classrooms to accommodate that, those numbers of students. And this is true with 6 feet of social distancing or 3 feet. With students in 2 separate spaces, we'll either need 2 teachers to teach that class, or, so it's Pete plus 1, or we need Pete plus somebody in the room to supervise while he's streaming into that classroom, or we need a substitute who can take Pete's lesson plan and execute it. We need some adult supervision, possibly some instruction, some range of those things. So it's one of those things, but not all 19 kids can be in the classroom at the same time. Allied arts, currently our students have one of the 2 allied arts that they would normally have on a rotating schedule. By having them meet every other day in trimester 3, we can keep most classes low in size. Cohort A would meet on the week 1 schedule, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, week 1, Tuesday, Thursday, week 2. And and cohort B would meet on the opposite schedule. We would have supervision and space needs for students whose allied arts class is not meeting on a given day, because those kids have to go somewhere and they have to be supervised doing something. 7th grade PE and 8th grade art are exceptions to that. Those classes meet daily for a trimester and would continue to do so in this model. But those are the reasons why space and supervision really remain issues for these classes. Okay, so some schedule changes. I'm going to fly through this one because Carol already highlighted quite a bit of it, but we do anticipate needing to lengthen the arrival and dismissal times. I don't have a great handle, if I'm honest, on how long it would need to be extended, because I don't know how long the busing is going to take, how many students would be riding the bus. I assume it's double, but maybe more folks would be driving their kids to school. That's got a lot of variables that's hard to grapple with without a little bit more information. I do anticipate needing to shorten some class periods to accommodate passing time. We might need to change how we're offering our allied arts classes, and we would need to activate our allied arts week 1, week 2 schedule and maintain enrollment in that one allied arts class. We also need to be just mindful of keeping the 4, 5, and the 6, 8 students as separate as possible as they move throughout the building. So again, schedule changes. And then just for additional consideration, it takes some time to merge the cohorts. What we've observed with folks who have made the effort to merge their cohorts already for concurrent teaching takes about a week to turn that around. Without all of those other variables of identifying spaces and so forth. A really simple logistical thing, I don't think 6-8 probably really needs to buy furniture, but we need to take all of the furniture that we pulled out of classrooms and stored in the cafeteria and in a storage container and move that back into some identified classroom space. So I think we're good on the furniture, but the movement of the furniture would be something that we would need to do. We would need to adjust our curriculum implementation strategy from a hybrid model to a full-time daily approach. And then, of course, we want to always be building classroom community once we're open, similar to the start of the school year. So that's Greeley Middle School, and I'm going to pass it off to Chris Hoffman for the high school.
Thank you, Maury. I attempted to, again, avoid the redundancies of what others have already said. Many of the things that Maury has articulated about what the model could look like at Greeley Middle School are similar for Greeley High School. What I'm going to present is not necessarily a specific plan, but just some considerations for how it could look at Greeley High School, and this is based on ongoing conversations with our other administrators in the district, as well as conversations with other high school administrators in our region who are asking themselves similar questions at this moment in time. And so just to paint a picture, many of my assumptions about how this could work at the high school assume what Maury suggested about shifting from a cohorted model to two lessons of instruction in each class each week and relying entirely on concurrent instruction. And really we're talking about getting our students into the building, not necessarily having their teacher teach them in the classroom in front of them every single period. But that would still happen at least once per week, but that we would be relying on technology to present that instruction to students virtually, even within the building. And so to do that, our primary space concern is really around overflow spaces. And so in order for, Marie used an example of a classroom of 19 students. Most of our classrooms right now are limited in the number of students they can hold to 12. And so if there were a class of 19 that we had, then in theory, we could put 12 students into that room, and we would then need overflow space for the additional 7 students. That could be in an unused classroom, which would require a supervisor, and I'll get to staff in just a second, or we could put them in a larger space, the cafeteria, commons, gymnasium, or GCA lobby perhaps. We could explore using our hallways for that overflow. Regardless, that would require supervision, and I'll get to staff in just a second. Likely, if we were to, and you know, the best answer, I spent pretty much all weekend thinking about this, and the best answer I could think of is like, could we house all our students in the building? Maybe. There are so many logistics to thinking about how this could work, and different possibilities for it that the best I could come up with is that maybe. Because if we begin to ask ourselves questions about unused spaces, the reality is there aren't very many unused spaces at all because they're already used for other purposes. And so in order to house students for overflow for their regular classrooms, we might lose instruction in other areas. And we certainly might not be able to provide the same educational experience. If I'm a science lab instructor, for example, and I really want my students to experience the dissection of that frog, to use the age-old example, I've really got a plan to do that with the kids when they're in the room in front of me. And so if I've got, and our science labs are a little bit larger and might be able to hold a few more kids, but the reality remains that not all of my 19 students could be in my science lab with me, and I'm going to need to plan to repeat that activity with 2 groups. And that renders the sort of live virtual instruction of concurrent learning more or less ineffective at that time for that model. The other option, and so likely, just to come back to loss of instruction, if we begin to take over spaces for one purpose, we might lose it for others, and that's not necessarily something that I would prefer to do. We could also look at lengthening our school day or changing the hours of our school day. That's truly a big picture idea that would require a rethink of our transportation model, that would require the rethink of our expectations of staff and contracts potentially, and I don't know that I have the authority to make those decisions standing here right now. That would require ongoing district collaboration with our staff. Speaking of staff, indeed, as I mentioned, we would need that same additional staff to provide supervision of our overflow spaces. If we relied exclusively on larger spaces, we could, in theory, get by with potentially 6 to 7 additional staff members alone providing that supervision. But again, if you consider what that means for the student's experience, that means that they're learning virtually in a large space with peers that are participating in a different class potentially, maybe having a hard time participating themselves. And so that's an important consideration. So, but that's the staff that we would likely need. We would also need to shift the responsibilities of our current staff. Others have mentioned the need for changes to the morning and afternoon routines, and I think at our level we have a lot of students who drive themselves, and we would need to shift staff to provide morning and afternoon supervision to a greater degree to ensure physical distancing in our parking areas, in our entrances and exits, and we would also need that to provide hallway supervision. If you came to Greeley High School during a transition right now, even with half of our students in the hallways, it's pretty congested at a few spots at particular moments in time. If we're going to do a good job maintaining physical distancing in our hallways with our entire student body, we would need greater supervision of that to ensure that students moved in an orderly manner through the hallways. And that would likely mean taking staff away from providing student support. The biggest hurdle that others have mentioned is we would definitely need to change our schedule to accommodate a change to lunch. Right now, we have 2 different lunch blocks in 4 different spaces around the room. Given that the maximum number of students in a space at one time can be 50, we currently have around 40 students, usually a little bit less, in each of our spaces having lunch at a given time, including in the space in the lobby here. we would need to double that in order, if we had all our students in the building, allowing for probably 4 different lunch blocks. What that would do would be to create a larger sort of open study hall time for all students in the middle of the day, where some students could receive support from teachers during that time, but truly that block of time would be about creating additional opportunities for eating lunch. My assistant principal and I, Don Gray, spent quite a bit of time on Friday thinking about a way to do lunch opposite our instructional blocks, and there's just not really an effective means for doing that without significantly disrupting instruction. It would also possibly mean the extension of passing times. We currently only have 5 minutes between our classes, which is barely enough to make it from the STEM room up to English, if that's where you're going. And particularly with more students, as I'll show you on the next slide, we would likely change our protocols to have students, at least from some locations, transition between classes outdoors. And that would require an extension of those passing times, as well as a longer arrival and dismissal. We would certainly want to, so just some additional considerations. I think we would really want to conduct some additional stress tests of our network. If we move to double the number of students on their laptops at a particular moment in time, all of them accessing, or excuse me, many of them accessing virtual instruction in our building as opposed to at home, we would need to make sure that our network could handle that load. And this is just one consideration that I think is important to note. We could do this while maintaining our cohorts, or if we wanted to, we could maximize the number of students attending a classroom at a particular moment in time. But I would need, and teachers would need, time to develop schedules for who gets to be in the classroom versus who has to be in the overflow group. And that's a pretty complicated consideration. Some students might thereby be able to attend class in person twice a week. Others would still only get it once certain weeks, maybe twice others. That's a very complicated schedule, which we could provide some guidance on, but ultimately I think the teachers would need to create those schedules themselves because with so many sections of classes around the building, there's no way that I could effectively make those determinations administratively. As I said, we'd also need to train staff and students in new routines. And the last point, which that I really want to reiterate, is I would anticipate if we made this change, we would have an increase in the number of students requesting to be fully remote students. In our most recent student survey, about 15% of students expressed either some or significant concern that they themselves might contract or spread COVID by coming to school. I anticipate if we had more bodies in the building, a lot of those students might request to move to fully remote environments, and that's something that we've worked hard with individuals to make a determination about. I can tell you for a lot of those learners, that has not been the right move, and we've ended up working really hard to get them to come back to school, and that's a time-consuming process. So we would need to make those adjustments as well. I would anticipate quite a few students making that request. There's a lot to think about. I do really appreciate this conversation. I think it's important that we consider how we get as many students in our buildings as possible. I think there's a lot that would be required to make that happen, and I look forward to the questions when we get to them.
I'd just like to thank the principals for giving that specific, and they've only had since Friday to really think this through, so it's a very complex issue, and for those folks that are listening, whether at home or here, it may seem like, well, really, these are all these things that are getting in the way of bringing all the kids back. But I have to keep reminding myself we're involved in a pandemic still, and we have to work, we're required to work off of what the Department of Ed and the CDC tells us. And right now, we are in the thick of it still, and we have to abide by those 3-foot distancing requirements. And those requirements do not look like, in the latest meetings that I've been in, that they will be gone this school year. Hopefully, they'll be gone next school year, but at this point, there's no indications that that 3-foot distancing, which is what the principals base this information on, to provide this information tonight, would be would be gone. So I think that's really a critical piece of information. I've been asked, several parents have been emailing me recently, and I apologize to any parents that I have not been able to respond to if it's taken a few days. But one question I keep getting asked is why are there a couple of other school systems in the area that are starting to move in that direction, and why can't Greeley do that? First of all, I think, I don't speak for other school systems, but I know that every district has its own set of conditions that it's working off of. And I will say that those that have started to move in the green direction either have some capacity already in their district, they have smaller schools they're working with, or they are working to advocate at the state level in order to make it happen, but they haven't actually implemented it yet. They've just discussed it. And so I think there's a big difference between talking about it and seeing if it's possible and actually implementing it, which is a totally different story. And I know there's a couple of communities, one a few miles from here, that have been talking about it, but it doesn't mean that they've actually done it. They're in the spot that we're in, trying to figure out what would it look like if we could do it, and what would it mean. But the biggest piece for us is the distancing requirements. Scott Poulin, who is Director of Operations, Finance, and Human Resources, I asked him if he would also just talk for a couple minutes about if we went green, what would it do to transportation, given that we have a 3-foot distancing requirement still in place, and also perhaps food services, if you wouldn't mind, Scott.
I don't have a nice slide presentation, so bear with me. That was wonderful. In transportation, currently there's about 17 buses on the road, and each one of those buses does 2 bus runs in the morning and 2 bus runs in the afternoon. So what it would mean, in order to social distance on the buses, each student, it has to be 1 student per seat. So you can basically get about 20 students on a bus. What we'd have to do is change from running 4 bus runs a day to 8 bus runs a day. And that would significantly change the start and the end times of school, is what you had heard from the administrators, by probably a 2-hour fraction in the morning and the afternoon, depending on how you decided to break that out. So that would be one of the issues that we would have to try and figure out. The other part is that a lot of our drivers who are currently not driving athletic trips and not driving at other times of the days where we used to have a lot of those trips available, those drivers are also cleaning in the schools during the daytime. So if we have a change where they're driving longer on a given day, those drivers won't be available to clean 2 hours a day in the facilities, so during the daytime. In terms of food service, there's refrigeration requirements. We also don't have enough staffing in order to continue with food service. If we bring all the students in on a particular day, we'd have to hire more staff in order to do that. So that's food service. And with transportation, it's pretty limiting on the numbers you can put on a bus. You'll also see the buses running around with the windows down, and also that there's about 20 students a bus maximum. So you'd have increased transportation times and start and end times that we'd have to take a look at.
So I just wanted to say we have a couple more slides about the post-pandemic, moving from pandemic, but I thought we'd stop, if it's okay, and just have the principals answer any questions that board members might have.
Sure, so I'll open it up to the board for anyone that has questions first. Margot.
I don't even think I can come up with a question, but I just want to thank you for getting us inside your buildings virtually. It's been a hard year to be on the school board and not be able to be in the buildings and seeing how it all works. And hearing from you is really, really helpful for us to process that. So thank you all for the time that you spent to help us see what's going on.
Thank you. So a few things. I'd like to echo the appreciation for all the work that you put on that in a very short amount of time. But, you know, if I'm playing along at home, doesn't feel great because, you know, you have that balance between here's why we can't, and I'm scribbling this down as you were speaking, here's why we can't, and as opposed to here's all the ways that we could. And then as I'm reading back through my notes, you did both. Because we can't, because of some very specific reasons from the state, here's how we could, and we don't have space, resources, bodies, whatever it would take to make that possible. I guess I would ask this question. If educators were prioritized as first responders and all were getting vaccinated, would this make a difference to your current plan? Anybody who wants to take a stroll.
I'll take a stab at that, and I can't guarantee that I'll know the answer. And your question reminds me of something that I wanted to say, which is that, like, under normal circumstances, presenting something that, like what I just said tonight, that has really significant implications for how our teachers go about their day-to-day, I would normally want their input, and I didn't gather any of their input in preparing tonight's presentation, just given the tight timeline. And so it's similarly why I don't know that I have a full answer to that question. I certainly think that given what we know about this virus and the risk it poses to people based on their age group, I think staff would feel quite a bit better with that vaccine teaching in front of a larger group of students potentially. I still would anticipate that the district would want to adhere to the guidelines in place at the state level. And so, you know, if that move in conjunction with the change to physical distancing requirements or something like that allowed us to reopen, that would make an enormous difference. I will still say that, especially at the high school, and I can't speak for those little ones, you know, our kids are basically adults, many of them. We have 18-year-olds in our building, and that places them in a category that the CDC is saying they should really be 6 feet apart. They are not often 6 feet apart in many circumstances right now. And so the last part of what I said in my presentation still holds true, which is I think I have a lot of students who would be similarly anxious about coming to school in that environment if they knew that double the number of students, were going to be here. So I think it would make a big difference for our staff. I think we have to keep our students in mind too, especially those older ones.
I appreciate that. If I may, before I relinquish, Madam Chair, you know, we've got warmer weather heading our way, which is exciting. And that in Mr. Porter's first slide, where you showed the information coming from the Department of Education and the CDC, and certainly that of the governor, it's this quandary that we're confronted with, because we're in green, according to the state, but we're in green with 6 different regulations or rules that we can't meet. And I can understand, look, I'm frustrated. Everybody here is frustrated. We want kids to be back in school, but it just doesn't, unless I'm missing something, it doesn't seem possible that we can do this without being violation of the state's rules and potentially having an impact on our funding if we do something that's outside of those. Do I have that correct?
No, that's completely correct. And, you know, it's not even the funding or in violation of the rules, it's also the sheer health risk that we keep getting told that we still are going to be facing as well, I mean, on top of that. And with 65 cases for the student population we have, that's a high number of cases in our district that we have worked through this year. And I think one of the ways that we've not closed schools very often, and you look at the number of days that schools have been closed, in red, when I say closed, in red to in-person learning, and being in red, it's very few. I mean, we just happen to be on one this week with Mabel I. Wilson School, but we've been able to do it partly because of the hybrid model and being able to quarantine a group of students at a time without actually closing the entire school to in-person learning. My concern is that if we're in green this school year, that we will be closing schools or putting schools in red almost continuously at this point. We are not out of this pandemic yet, and I wish we were. I know my kids are tired of it, my own children, They just want to go to school and forget this and move on. And I think most parents are there. They are ready, and most kids are ready. And it's been almost an entire year. It was March 13th, so it was just shy of a year now. And I think we're all just tired. There's they talk about COVID fatigue. And I think there is a COVID fatigue that's set in. But I also think that if we continue to do the responsible thing, that we can get to green in September, which is what we all want, and start a school year off in a fresh place, and be able to have the state relax those standards if we continue doing what we're supposed to. Schools have been remarkably successful because we have followed the CDC rules almost to the T, and it's not just our district. It's really virtually every district in the state has done what they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else have any questions?
I have a question, Tyler.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Jeff, have we looked at, I know that there's some thought on taking and putting just one grade back in full-time or anything like that. I think personally for my own kids, it would be hard to see, a different grade go back full-time and then, they're not going and things like that. But I'm wondering if we're looking at something outside the box to try to get as much instructional time as possible. And
Yes.
if there's any way to do that with the younger kids. I know that the older kids, I think it's harder because they're more susceptible.
Yeah, we have been talking about that since the very beginning, actually. If there's an opportunity for kids that are struggling to come in on a Wednesday or something like that, those are things that we've tossed around logistically for months, actually, in trying to figure out if we could do it. But recently, Mrs. Laughlin and Mr. Muncie and myself had a conversation probably a couple weeks ago about the possibility of bringing back kindergarten and first grade at least, considering that their class sizes tend to be a little bit smaller than the rest of the school district. We talked it through, and there was a lot of obstacles that we would have to get through. I don't think that's completely off the table if that was a direction that we wanted to still go in, or the board wanted us to. There's a lot of things that would need to happen in order to make that work. And I'm not prepared tonight to talk about what that would be. But it is complicated even with 2 grades looking at, but it is certainly a conversation that we have started in our district.
Okay, thank you. I think it's good to just make sure that we're constantly looking outside the box, which I know everyone is and teachers are as they're trying to teach our kids through this.
We'll go to Kate and then Mike.
So something that really hit home for me today is we've received a couple emails from teachers, and one thing that really stuck out to me was the amount that, similar to what Jennifer said, we thought about bringing one grade, like a younger grade, in. What it seems like to me is that teachers are working hard to identify the students that need additional instruction time and additional support, and they're prioritizing that on Wednesdays. So that was really heartening, and it made me feel a little bit better, because I know there are really students that are struggling, whether it's academic or mental health-wise. So just knowing that those Wednesdays are time that our teachers are prioritizing one-on-one student time, I thought was really exceptional. And I also think that there aren't even words to say how difficult this is. There's nothing that could ever sum up what every single person in this room is going through. So I'm not even going to try. But thank you to our administrators for being here this evening and really working it through. And I'm sure that, like many other weekends, you spent your entire weekend working on this, and I can hear how tired everyone is.
And I didn't know before Mike asked the question, but if one of the administrators or a couple administrators wanted to talk about the opportunities on Wednesdays that we do have students who are struggling that are getting support virtually. I didn't know if there was anyone that had a specific thing that they might want to say.
I can start since I'm here, and then Mark can take over. I think, we identified 2 hours of the day that are reserved for students to connect with staff. This is all virtual at this point. currently 8 to 10. We're going to shift that to a little bit later in the day. Some of our high school students maybe don't make those 8 o'clock meetings. But it's also true that we have staff who are using their entire days on Wednesdays to meet with students. And that depends on the nature of the discipline and the needs of students and the level of support that's needed. But that's how that's happening primarily right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say that some teachers have prioritized having brief check-ins with their classes of students, sort of scheduled at times that don't conflict with their planning meetings. Our regular ed techs, we have 4 of them, and they're amazing. And they schedule time throughout the day on Wednesdays to interact with our students remotely. Some of that's drop-in, some of it's scheduled by appointment. You know, certain students have been identified as needing that additional support. And so there's a scheduled time for those kiddos to be working with one of our ed techs. Often it's more social emotional check-in and just sort of somebody to talk to while they're doing their work, and less about the academics. So there are a variety of things that are happening on Wednesdays. And then I just want to reiterate that for our special educators, their time is spent providing direct instruction to students every day, whether they're remote or in person. So that also happens on Wednesdays.
Yeah, I think that's another point to reiterate, is that we have students on IEPs. We have roughly 400 students on IEPs in our district. We have students on 504 plans in our district, and those plans or IEPs call for a certain level of service during the week. So they have to receive a certain number of hours of service beyond the regular classroom. So those students are obviously serviced every day of the week, whether remotely or in person. We also have approximately 30 students in our district right now that are receiving 4 days of instruction in person, plus they're receiving a remote day on Wednesdays. So we have a lot of different layers of options for kids depending on their need right now. But I'm sorry, Mike, I jumped in front of you.
No, don't apologize. And this may be better suited for the workshop, and first, just to echo, Kate, you said it well. This has been brutal and especially this tonight. It's kind of jarring. Have the mental health presentation, and then we have this presentation, and it feels like we have mental health pitted against public health. I don't even know if it feels, it truly is that way. So it's terrible, and it's terrible for working parents, it's terrible for kids, it's terrible across the board. So it stinks, and I feel the frustration and the anger that a lot of folks in the community feels. I'm dealing with it personally with 2 kids at home and grappling with childcare and work and so on and so forth. But all that aside, we're going to thaw out in the next couple of months at some point, and outdoor space becomes much more appealing. And understanding, there's always the staffing issue and such, but wondering if there's been thought given to, especially not closing the door on just being creative with anything later in the year, May or so, and especially utilizing outdoor space, and not necessarily to be or to replace the academic time, but potentially even just as an additional care time, a time for kids to congregate outside of the learning time on those days they were going to be remote. Just giving a more opportunity to be social, to deal with the social and emotional trauma that they're dealing with. And so I wonder if we could just give some thought to using, our awesome campus and getting kids outside on days they weren't going to be here, and just seeing what we could do. Could we work with the rec department to expand that, to think of something creative? So again, this may be better suited for the workshop, but I did want to raise that.
Yeah, we often talk about outdoor learning too in terms of the fall and spring. I think most of us think that way about the outdoor learning, but kids are also, outside for various reasons, and I still think it's learning during recess or lunch. And one thing that's been really heartening is that a lot of our classes, especially at the younger levels, have been out all winter. Anytime they're in person, Teachers are taking them to the track. The track has never been more utilized than it has been this year. And during the winter months, kids are still out on the track. They're not just out on the playground at Mabel Wilson or GMS 4-5. They've made their way into the field hockey field and the track and in all those areas. We've had kids sledding, thanks to the PTO for buying these really cool sleds for kids to use while in person in our schools. So I think even during the winter months, we really did talk about winter being, an okay time to go outdoors. And it may not look like the traditional learning, take your book or computer outside, but there's other things going on outside as well that are part of the learning process. So I've been excited to see the number of teachers just taking their kids out, even in the winter. That is a change, and I hope that changes. It's not a change. We have a lot of teachers that do that anyway, but I've seen more of it this year, and I hope it continues.
Mike, and then Ann.
Well, it's not a particularly highfalutin comment, but one thing that really struck me when watching all your guys' great presentations was, frankly, the bottom line. Between all the extra staff and the extra space and whatnot, being a money guy, my little dollar signs started going off. And, I just, even if we could magically make a wave one make this happen, I'm not sure where the dollars are going to come from. So that concerns me a lot as well.
Thank you. Ann?
I guess I just had two things. One was it was also really interesting to see how our COVID rates compare to Yarmouth and Falmouth. I didn't realize that ours were, so much higher, especially from Falmouth with their student body being more equal to ours than Yarmouth. And the other thing that I've just been trying to think of other ways that we can bring more kids back into is just to ask people in the community and parents to consider applying to be a substitute. So if it comes up that we have people that we can call and say, hey, we have a space for you to come in. Can you come in and help with the kids?
Thank you. There's been so much information, and I know that this has all happened since Friday. So thank you for spending your weekend putting this information together for us this evening. I think one thing that came up that I was surprised to hear, but I think it's important to reiterate, is a lot of the juggling of logistics to get us to more instructional days would almost reduce some instructional time as well. And that was something I hadn't really thought about. And thank you for doing the work to figure out that might be a possibility of an outcome from changing from where we are now. And I also want to mention or also say what Ann was just saying. I was surprised to see our numbers so much higher. And I think we're kind of seeing a theme tonight that we as a community have to figure out solutions to this, to all of this. This is not just the responsibility of the school. So thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us tonight. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you're okay, I'd like to let the administrators go. They have to prepare for another busy day tomorrow. So if you would like to leave before I go into the post-pandemic, feel free, or you can stay. It's up to you. So I'm just going to go, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight. This will be something we'll talk about a lot in the next few weeks. But I wanted to I know that actually the topic tonight was supposed to be originally the post-pandemic planning, and I wanted to give a quick overview of that. So defining post-pandemic, if you look at the World Health Organization, they define post-pandemic as a disease activity returning to the more typical levels experienced before the onset of the pandemic, which would be, in our case, in the United States, about a year ago. And the other way I've seen it defined is by our district doctor, who was very much in communication with the CDC, as reaching herd immunity. And herd immunity is defined anywhere from 70 to 85% of eligible people or people who are available to be vaccinated are vaccinated, is the range that we've been seeing. There's an assumption in post-pandemic planning that by September of this year, Maine will have entered the post-pandemic stage of this disease and can prepare for a return to green, with some health and safety considerations, obviously, that we have to continue with, presumably masks. And that would involve the social distancing requirements being lifted or relaxed. Connections, we want to make the connections to the pandemic response plan. We have a pandemic response plan, and we want to make sure that any post-pandemic planning is keeping that plan certainly in mind, as well as our strategic plan. And then opportunities. There's been a lot of things that we've learned as schools across the state, nation, and right here in our district about different processes for learning, different ways of doing things. And I consider some of that as claiming value and opportunities that we did not really consider a year ago, and now we're considering, and we don't want to let go of some of those good things that have come out of this, some silver linings. The 3 pillars of post-pandemic planning are really health and safety, instructional focus, knowing that we have, and I'm not going to use the word loss, but that we've had an atypical 18 months by the time we get to September of 2021 this year. That instruction will need to be not only back at its typical level, but adjusted to make sure that students are maximizing their academic focus, and our teachers are able to do that in the classroom with 5 days back in the classroom. And the third one is social emotional health and wellness. How do we support transitioning back to a green 5-day-a-week schedule? And then how do we work with kids who are not able to make that transition easily? And how do we help them? So really the last thing I want to share is that we have a process for getting there for the post-pandemic plan. I've had a number of emails from parents in the last couple of weeks asking the word how do you get to that point where we're ready for September to be back in a more typical fashion. And we are drafting, the leadership team has been drafting right now a plan that will be going first for staff feedback on the 30th of this month. We'll be asking the staff to look at a draft plan, give us feedback, input, and this will be an ongoing input process for a while. On April 1st at 6 o'clock, we are asking parents to look at this draft and give us feedback. On April 5th, our district physician, Dr. Desai, will be here with the board. And it will be in a recorded session where he'll be talking about where he believes the status of the pandemic will be by the end of the school year, and then by September. Dr. Desai is very in tune with not just the state CDC, but also the national CDC, and is very current in all of the information, and should be able to provide some very good information on April 5th to the board. On April 6th, we'll be offering a second parent feedback session on the draft or proposed post-pandemic plan, again, 6 o'clock. These will be virtual meetings. On May 3rd at 6:30, as a regular board meeting, there'll be a first read of the plan after we've received and implemented as much feedback as we can into the draft plan. And then on May 17th, we're hoping that the board will consider adopting the second read or the approval of that plan after we have received feedback from our stakeholders. And I just want to reiterate, it says parent feedback. We're also asking for student feedback, and it really should say family feedback, and I'll make sure I make that change. We want our students to also be part of this process and to come. So it's not just parent, it's student and parent feedback. And we'll have a dedicated session just for our staff. So the timeline could change, but generally speaking, I think this is what we're trying to hold to for a timeline. So that's it for the post-pandemic portion, a lot shorter.
Jeff, can you just clarify what will the team or the committee that is going to be responsible for this post-pandemic plan be called, just so I can know for my vernacular?
It's initially the leadership team.
Okay.
And we'll be also be talking with the association.
Okay.
During this process, so it's kind of a collaborative effort between We'll be sharing, as we're developing this plan before it goes to the staff, we'll be getting the association's feedback on the plan itself too.
Jeff, is there going to be coordination with other towns around us on post-pandemic planning as well?
Yeah, every week I'm involved in a county meeting, and we have started talking about we shouldn't do this work together. We've been working together for, a year on everything. So we did start talking about the post-pandemic plan and what are you doing and what are you doing, and let's not, be spinning the wheel on all this stuff. So it's definitely something I've been talking about. Everyone's doing it a little differently and approaching it differently, but I think this will probably get a broader input at the end of the day from as many people as we possibly can get involved.
So I just wanted to ask the board real quick, because I'm noticing that it is 9 o'clock and that there are a lot of people waiting to speak. And I'm wondering if the board agrees to move the public comment up now instead of after committee reports and superintendent reports.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah? All right. We'll open up public comment for comments related to the presentations that were just given, returning to school and pandemic planning. I can't say that for some reason. Just as a reminder that you have a 3-minute time to speak, and that when you are done, to please leave so that other people can speak, so that we can make room for everyone. Yep, just approach. I don't really have I know that everyone signed a piece of paper that's part of our policy. There's no order to it. It's really just part of the policy, so thank you for doing that.
I scribbled some notes, so hopefully I can figure out what I'm going to say. My name's Emily Garcia. I have one child in 4th grade and another child who will be attending kindergarten in the fall. We are eagerly awaiting a return to full in-person learning, and I want to express my support for the efforts to make this happen. I am very concerned about the short and long-term harms of not reopening to full in-person learning. Some might even argue we are already at a point that the harms are greater than the benefits. I understand that problems like this are complicated, clearly, as the presentations tonight explained. But while the challenges are great, I am not willing to accept that they're insurmountable. I'm thinking ahead to the fall. What will be different between now and then, in 6 months? While I'm very hopeful we will be in a better place in the fall as vaccines roll out, there's not a vaccine for children younger than 16, and the vaccine isn't even in the study phase for children under age 12. Therefore, it is highly likely that come September, and for an indeterminate period thereafter, the entire student body of at least the elementary school will not be vaccinated. As explained, a significant barrier to fully reopening is that the school cannot accommodate the state's physical distancing requirement for the children, and that the only way past this is for the state to relax their physical distancing guidelines. Is it realistic then to think that the state will be willing to relax this requirement when the students will not be vaccinated? And if they do feel it is safe to relax this requirement, despite a lack of vaccination among the student body, then what are they waiting for? If the requirements aren't relaxed, then a solution to this problem is essential. I work at a hospital. We are not able to remain 6 feet apart from people, but I feel incredibly safe at my job because the distancing is one layer of the mitigation, all of the mitigation strategies. It isn't perfection of every single layer. It's all the layers working together, even if they're not perfect. That makes me feel safe. Lastly, I would like to make a request for more communication. We need more details and more transparency about what the challenges are, what the district is doing to address these challenges, how you're working with the state and public health officials, if they're helping you, and the benchmarks and goals we're aiming for. I think parents would be more understanding, and some frustrations, stress, and assumptions could be completely avoided if we were given more information than we've received thus far, as well as more opportunities to ask questions, which it looks like that will be happening soon. We are supposed to be a community, and yet I feel like an outsider. I put my son on the bus and send him off to a building I've never been inside of, to teachers I've only met through a video conference. Parents want to know more and to help in any way we can to get our kids back in school full-time. I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Share more of that with us. Help us to have confidence that we are going to get to a better place and better understand when we might get there. Today's meeting is a start, but we need more to feel confident that a full reopening is on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Julie McDonald from North Yarmouth. And I just wanted to say I want to applaud your comment earlier about medication for mental health. I'm also a nurse, and it's a big deal to me to reduce that stigma of mental health. And if anybody out there is having any difficulty at all, please reach out to anyone in your circle. Don't be ashamed or afraid to go on medication or to go into therapy. It's really important. And I say that as a nurse and a mom. So thank you for that comment. Listening tonight, it seems to me that things are upside down. I get now, and Jeff, we've had multiple emails, but I get it now. The space thing is ridiculous. I mean, you've got people talking about needing to add 20 more classrooms. I mean, it's just not going to happen, right? So I get where the school's coming from now in terms of not having the space, to do what they need to do. But I wonder if, this board and the Falmouth board and the Yarmouth board and the superintendents, if they got together and instead of sitting in on meetings with the CDC and being told how it's going to be, went to those meetings and started raising questions. Like, I'm a nurse. What is 3 feet? I mean, honestly, what is 3 feet between 2 kids in a closed room, and maybe some windows are open? But if everybody is masked, has anybody questioned that? Has anybody questioned why do we need 3 feet between our kids? Talk about the science. Like, where is the science behind that? And why do other states have their kids in school full time when the school is just as big as ours? They've managed to do it. And I understand, Jeff, you're saying you get questions from parents about other schools that are open 5 days a week. And they're smaller, so they can do it. They don't have the same population. But with other states, and thinking outside the box, with other states that have been able to have their kids go back full-time in school districts as large as ours, why can't we look to those states for an example, and then we take that to Janet Mills, and we take that to the Maine CDC, and we say, look, here's the data. You keep telling us we have to abide by this 3-foot separation, which is completely impractical. Why? Explain, show us why this is important and explain to us how other states can do it, but we can't. And you start putting the pressure on them to relax those guidelines and to put pressure on them and question, say, what is your reasoning behind saying we have to have 3 feet between our kids in school if they're also masked? So it would be great to see this group and other school boards and other districts come together and flip it around and start putting the pressure on the Maine CDC and make them answer to you guys and to us as to why they've come up with this rule, say, when other states don't have it. So I think that would be maybe an approach to think about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sean McBrady, Cumberland. I'll bet everybody in this room $1 American that Mr. Porter and the administrators will drag this out until the school budget vote. The vote will entail what we've heard tonight: not enough space, not enough teachers, not enough staff. Just like Democrat Governor Mills bankrupting Maine, Democrats always want more. So let's put a new $40 million school into this narrative, and maybe at some point we'll have enough space. You guys should have worked retail. Seniors can't pay their taxes now because you want more. More is not an option. 100 town employees
Point of order.
received no raises
Madam
this
Chair,
year because
yes.
you want more.
This is not related to pandemic planning.
No, actually, I'm getting that.
No, it's not related at all, Mr. McBride.
Absolutely.
You're
So can you
abusing
please
the
alter
policy.
your comments?
Sure, you can fly an enclosed plane shoulder to shoulder with strangers all over the world, but you can't figure out how to get students in this school. 93% of the deaths in Maine with COVID are over 60 years old. 53% of the deaths in Maine with COVID are over 80 years old. No one in Maine under 20 has died with COVID. That's 0% for you liberal Democrats. Maine is 45th in the nation for deaths with COVID per 100,000. 45th. Flu deaths have all but disappeared. It's a miracle. Florida has less than the U.S. average and has been open the entire time. Didn't you just hear the entire presentation about increased anxiety, depression, and suicide? It's not about science. nor the health of the students in these Democrat-run states. It's all about control. It's because this state and the school board are unfortunately run by Democrats like Mike Williams. Vote for change in June and you'll get it. You've chosen not to put the kids back in school. And like the lady before me said, figure it out. Figure it out with the extra $0. Zero. Our kids' lives depend on it. Make an effort.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Mancini. I live in North Yarmouth. I work for a large healthcare system that is now responsible for mass vaccinations statewide. And today I sat in on a meeting and listened to our COO share about the extreme complexities, intricacies, last-minute changes, and unforeseen circumstances that our leadership has been navigating to serve the public interest. And I couldn't help thinking of our school board and our administration and all the complexities that I think were well laid out by administration tonight. And I wanted to acknowledge that there's a tremendous amount of work done that we, the public, don't see. Maybe now tonight we have a better picture of that. And I want to advocate for a spirit of community, civility, and respectfulness, not just here in this room, but online, because I've witnessed quite a bit of hostility that seems to be unwarranted towards the school board. And as we all are working to face this completely novel and difficult, complicated situation, it has been disheartening for myself as a healthcare worker to see how this challenge has divided communities rather than unified us with a common purpose. Everyone wants students in school full-time. Everyone, the faculty, the board, students, well, not my kids, but administration, parents, teachers, but people also don't want to pay higher taxes. They don't want sick children or adults. They don't want to refrain from sleepovers and unmasked gatherings, which I hear is pretty common in our district. They don't want to volunteer on the school board, and there are going to be those who don't bother to get the vaccine. So thank you for your hard work and your great efforts to achieve a solution that certainly will not satisfy everyone. But I hope that we can do so by rising above blaming public officials, making negative assumptions about their intentions, and holding unreasonable expectations. If we can adhere to principles of respect, community, and civility, we will, both here and online, we will better serve students academically as well as their mental health. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Board. I will second many comments that were already made this evening. It is very important to, in my belief, to the children of this community that we get them back to school with more in-person instruction. I have kids grades 4 to 10, and I'm sorry, I didn't say I was from Cumberland, but I'm Hannah, I'm from Cumberland, and there are challenges at all 3 grade levels, and there's challenges for every family, as you're aware, and I think we can think outside the box and plan ahead for the future. I was very pleased to see that we're already starting to think about the fall, because it's coming and it's going to be here quick, and I would love to see that we have a really solid plan for September. Based on what I saw tonight, it's very clear to me there's not a lot of support to add additional instruction time now, which is disheartening, but I understand the challenges faced with turning the ship mid-year. I will say, though, that as a parent, I will be vulnerable here and tell you that I did have to pull one of my children at the start of the school year because his instructional needs were not being met. And his school is allowed to do things like touch the box. And guess what? They've had 0 COVID cases. And they touch things, and they still wear the masks, and they follow the rules. But I think in some cases we could see the bigger picture and just try to add a few things back in for our kids. Try to let the kindergartners play with toys. Try to let the high schoolers go outside for lunch. My son's school also goes out to eat almost year-round, and they just wear their snow. I think we can be creative as a community, and we can do what these kids need, which is more instruction time and time with peers. So thank you for considering. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Nikki Williams, and I am a resident of North Yarmouth. I have to be honest, I came up with quite a speech, and I appreciate that a lot of my questions had been addressed during a lot of the presentations, so I'm going to kind of wing it with just my feelings, which are very important, I'm sure, to all of you. I have a child who will be starting kindergarten in the fall, and I just have to echo my concerns about what the plan is. I think it's so great that our administrators put so much time into these plans, but I'm questioning why they started on Friday and why it didn't entail larger groups of people. I really appreciate the fact that we have a schedule for adding community involvement. I think that that's huge. I mean, I am myself as a nurse. I work for the largest hospital in the state, and my main focus, I'm in administration, is patient flow. We've been challenged with flowing patients in and out of our hospital, as you probably know, and it's been ebbing and flowing. But we've always had plans in place to accommodate for the next level or the next wave that's coming. We have plans in place that go so deep, it's a little scary. And we also have outside parties, third parties working with us to determine what those things are that we do need. So my questions are, who's working with us? How do we extend to them? And certainly if we need additional voices to try and put pressure on the CDC, I feel like you have quite a community that would love to back that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Orlando, I'm from Cumberland. I've never been to a meeting, but I guess I was gonna ask, is it possible to ask a couple questions and then do what I was gonna prepare for comments, or no?
So generally, we do not respond to public comment.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I'll just go with this. I mean, I'm conflicted. I think that my wife and I, we've adhered to all the mask requirements. We social distance. We're doing our best. I know it's necessary. But we've watched our son, who's a kindergartner, go from loving school, like excited to go. We didn't even have to get him dressed his last year in preschool. He was that excited, to hating school. And it's not the teachers, it's the whole pandemic. And we're talking 6 months. In 6 months, he went from vibrant, loved learning. Every opportunity we had was a learning opportunity, counting sugar at breakfast, all those things. And you fast forward now, and he won't go out and play with his friends. We can't even really get him to leave the house. He stopped doing puzzles. It's a struggle to get him to do his schoolwork. He won't go upstairs alone without one of us. And in the daylight with the lights on. And so to see his regression kills me. And I felt like coming here tonight, and there was a lot of great information, that we were already at a point where, at what point do we feel like the impact on the kids, the 3,000 people in our district, is outweighing the health risk, frankly. Amanda's dad, 70, just got COVID. So I fully understand that you can't take numbers, and I don't want to come off callous. But we were at between 359 and 408 cases here in Cumberland, North Yarmouth. If you extrapolate the deaths, and this is where it sounds callous, but I think we need to have this discussion. That would be 6 people. Now, tyranny of small numbers, totally get it. Maybe it's 12. I was already at a point where it's how how do we weigh what's happening to a whole generation of kids in this 12, now it looks like it's going to be 18 months, against the health risk? And then we see the numbers, and frankly, I was speechless. You can tell I'm choked up a little bit. 40% of our student body is considering, or 18 to 24-year-olds, and then presumably maybe our student body is considering suicide. And the root of it is not being able to do normal things. And so I would implore us as a community, as teachers, educators, all of us, to work with the CDC like the people before me have suggested and say, look, it's at a point where we need to have real tough conversations about a whole generation of kids. And I know there's no easy answer, but I think we need to really start talking about that, because I don't think we can go another, call it, 2 months, 3 months into the summer, and then all the way to winter, and not expect that 40% in the mental health study goes up. So I realize it's a challenge. I thank everybody for the work you're doing. And I think we need to figure out a way to do more. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amanda Orlando, from Cumberland as well. And it's obviously a very emotional topic for everybody. I came with a detailed outline, but like one of the women in front of me, you answered a lot of my questions as well. I would like to reiterate that, we have a kindergartner, and we've seen a huge regression since the beginning of the year. And he's one that he loves school, he loves playing, he just enjoys life. And we've seen where he doesn't enjoy any of those things, and it's really difficult to watch. I was really pleased to hear that you guys as well are hoping for some out-of-the-box thinking, and I was also pleased to hear, once the spring comes, are we talking about utilizing the outside, potentially kindergartners in first grade? Can we get them back full-time? I think that's huge. I know Massachusetts has an April timeframe of trying to get their elementary schools back. Can we do something like that? I know Falmouth, Yarmouth, and Scarborough are implementing a task force to work towards coming back full-time. Is that something that we can do? I know we talk about the community coming together. Can parents and educators create a task force amongst the leaders? I know you had mentioned that, Mr. Porter, and the association, to try to come up with a plan to get the kids back to school full-time. And we saw it in the presentations. We know that a huge impact is the staffing and the spacing. So we know it's a huge challenge. I think one of my biggest concerns is if we can't do it this spring, we need to make sure that we're also preparing for this fall, because I think as parents, we're also worried and concerned that things aren't going to change, and then what happens this fall, because we can't continue to have the kids be the ones that sacrifice so much. And then I did want to leave you, Mr. Porter, with one other item that I read in an email that you had recently sent about the Binax Now testing. And I know as a district we opted out of those. But I didn't know if that's something that we could revisit, considering within the last few hours we got an email that May is going red because of all of the quarantining and staffing shortages. Is there the possibility to discuss that again, to try to mitigate the staffing shortages and the need for red days? But I do appreciate your time, and I appreciate all of the comments in the presentations tonight. It was super helpful to come and watch, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I actually hate public speaking. I'm going to come from the other end of the spectrum. My name is Kim Stewart, and I have an 8th grader at Greeley Middle School and a freshman at Greeley High School. I'm proud to say both of my children are straight A students They have been in this district their entire school career. My husband is a product of Greeley High School, and I also went through the system as well. We chose Greeley High School and the Greeley School District simply because of all the work you do. I've been to one school board meeting. I do read the minutes, I kind of follow along. I've always been very confident in the job that you have done in our teachers and our administrators. Last year, when a bunch of children in my daughter Haley's grade were considering private education, she thought it was crazy. She's like, why would you leave Greeley? It's the best. And I was like, I'm with you, we're staying. And she's changed. She specifically said tonight that she wanted to know when you would decide if next year was going to be hybrid. She has applied and been accepted at Cheverus High School, as has my incoming freshman. We've taken out paperwork to take out a home equity loan to pay for a better education, which says a lot considering the mill rate in this town. Basically, I have a whole bunch of questions, and I get that you can't answer them. I'm frustrated my high schooler was quarantined. She was in the science lab, which I know is about 60 feet all the way around. She has 3 other students, and the student who sat diagonally across from her had COVID, and we only know this because he emailed and said he was sorry to his students, or his other students, I guess. That's not CDC guidelines. She was 45 feet away from this child. That's not within 6 feet. She had a mask on. I can't, for the life of me, understand why she had to quarantine. Why are we not paying better attention to that? On February 21st, the CDC guidelines said that close contacts had to be within that 6 feet. And all night I have listened to you tell us that the majority of kids are maintaining at least 6 feet. So I'm very confused, and I would love clarification as to why we're still quarantining if teachers have to be 6 feet away. If they're maintaining that distance, then we're meeting CDC guidelines, and that's not considered a close contact. My husband works for the Portland Fire Department, and he's the deputy chief here in Cumberland. He transports COVID patients on a regular basis. He transported 3 this week at work. He's not a close contact. He had proper PPE. If that's the case, I will pay for my kids' teachers to have that proper PPE because I feel like that's going to get them in school, and that's what we need to do. Both Cheverus and Wells high schools, and I'm sorry I only have their numbers, are in school full-time, 1 remote learning day on Wednesday. Both schools are within 50 students of our Greeley High School, and yet we have at least 10,000 more square feet than each of their schools. They made it work, and we can't under the same main CDC guidelines. That's extremely frustrating for my high schooler when she looks at you and says, Mom, it's math. I don't have an argument for her, and so that's frustrating. I love that you collaborate.
I just want to say that you have hit 3 minutes, and I have to be fair to give everybody the same amount of time. So if you just have a couple more sentences, you're welcome to share them, and then we'll have to move on to the next speaker.
Oh, okay. So I would love to see more curriculars take precedence. Sports are playing, drama is not. We have this beautiful building. We should be using it. I would love to say that, oh, wow. So I'm quite frankly saddened that we're at this state. I really feel like we need to be doing more for our students. I'm frustrated at the tone of our administrators. We're asked, tell me why this can't work versus what can we do to make it happen. We talk a lot about equity, and I can totally get behind the education of that, but I felt that that presentation seemed extremely privileged for what we demand to have, because I know that other schools, I work at one, don't have that, and they're still in school more than we are. And as a student, I don't have an answer for those questions, and it's really frustrating.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julie Susie. I have an 8th grader at Greeley Middle School, and my son loves his teachers. Has always had a great experience at Greeley Middle School. I'm here today to ask you a different question. I would like to pose the question, what is the definition of safe as it pertains to children returning to the classroom full-time? My concern is how many times the goalposts have been moved. Over the past year, we were told everyone needs to stay home for 14 days to flatten the curve. We need a vaccine. We need to get X number of people vaccinated. We need herd immunity. There's a new mutation. There's the South African mutation, the English mutation. With every step forward, there is a new goalpost, a new stake in the ground that seems to move out of reach our children's ability to resume their childhood. Again, my question is, how do you define a safe school regarding COVID-19? For instance, are we willing to accept any risk? If we have 10 cases, can we resume a normal schedule? What about 5 cases? What about 1 case? We have learned a great deal about COVID in 1 year. One interesting find is that children do not appear to be super spreaders or experience severe illness for the most part, thankfully. Our children have suffered tremendously from this pandemic. The question is, how much longer will they have to put their lives on hold? If our definition of a safe school is having eradicated COVID-19 100%, the children could be experiencing this disruption to their education, the isolation, and any mental issues for years. Is this something we are willing to accept? Or are we willing to accept some level of risk to allow our children to get their childhood back? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a preschooler, she's 4, kindergarten, he's 6. I come home from work for lunch, or I come home from work at 5 o'clock and they're sitting at the table looking at a computer screen or an iPad screen. Isn't the whole point of raising children, especially when they're that young, is to get them away from these screens? Don't we all try to do that? Don't we? Yes? We do, right?
Sure, I do.
The other day, I get home from work, and my son says to me, or he tells me, about how at lunch, he has to sit at his desk or chair, or sit at his table during lunch, take off his mask, and so that they don't talk to each other and spread the virus, they have to watch TV or films. Everybody in this room envision that. How many kids are in a kindergarten class, staring ahead, eating their lunch at a television monitor? That's not right. And that's not what we're here for. That's not what everybody's here for, to raise our children this way, so they can't socially interact. That was a microcosm of this whole thing. It's got to end. We have to open these schools. I was just in Texas and I was in Florida for work. They're wide open, all the schools. Everybody here is very upset, including you all, I know. But you have to get mean. Get up to Augusta. Talk to these people. If you're worried about your teachers and your staff, tell Augusta to get these people vaccinated, ASAP. They're shipping in 12,000 vaccines of the J&J, the Johnson & Johnson, 1 shot this week. Who up here has gone there to say our teachers deserve it? Anybody? I didn't think so. Have you?
I have sent letters.
You have?
Prioritizing teachers, yes.
Well, I'll go with you. You can get in my truck and we can go together. Because something's got to happen here. These kids are going to lose it. And the parents are going to lose their minds too. And it's easy I know you have children, but at some point, this thing has got to stop. because the cons are far outweighing the pros. And I don't know what the pros are, but that's all I got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your work. We really do appreciate it. My name is Amber Wagner, and I am from Cumberland. I have 2 children in 4th grade and 2nd grade. My comment tonight is just that I totally understand that this spring is going to be really challenging, but I'm really looking forward to the fall. Our schools are overpopulated already. We've had a large number of kids that have been pulled out and put into private school. We have more buildings that are coming online and more students that are coming in. I'm hopeful that the 3 feet will be gone with by the time the fall comes, but I don't know if that's realistic. Are we planning for that, and how can we make sure we can still get kids back to school 5 days a week in the fall with all those factors that we have within the communities? And the other part is that we have a wonderful community here that is here to help. So if you need petitions signed to get teachers vaccinated, if you need help moving stuff from storage, if you need whatever it is that you need, ask. The community is here and wants to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Geary, North Yarmouth, and I'm also a student at Greeley High School. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about this whole, you guys trying to get us back into school 5 days a week. And well, it does seem like a good idea. However, I'm going to touch on a few topics that no one has ever brought up. One of those, the most important, being the fact that cohort A and B are in fact on a different schedule, and this would be hard for us to try and merge back. So, for instance, today, in one of my classes, I had a test today. However, the other cohort didn't. They're going to take that test when they come back to school. And instead, we got an assignment that they are instead going to get, of course, when they come back to school. So if we wanted to try and come back, it really wouldn't work. We would essentially need some sort of break in order to kind of catch up and be able to fully merge the schedules if we are going to bring everyone back together onto one schedule. And a couple other things that, of course, with the spring, of course, brings the opportunity of, with the snow being gone, the chance that we could possibly go outside. I'm not entirely sure about that, mostly because of the fact it's probably going to be soaking wet, because Maine really doesn't dry up until June. We could, of course, bring towels, but I don't know how many people want to sit on wet grass while they're trying to go through school. And then there's also the issue of a lot of our stuff is done through computers and Wi-Fi and all that stuff. I'm not 100% sure it'll work, but it could, considering the fact we've gotten supposedly upgraded internet. And if we can't go outside, I would hope that the temperatures are going to start warming up so we could inevitably start opening up the windows and allowing for more natural circulation. And I think that's about it. That's just some things for you guys to think about, considering the fact that I'm kind of the one that's going through a lot of this right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we know if there's anybody out in the hallway that was hoping to speak? No, we're empty. Okay. Is there anyone else? Okay. Looks like we do. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Pruenzi, a teacher at Greeley Middle and High Schools and also Vice President of the MSAD 51 Education Association. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and for working tirelessly throughout the summer and fall and winter to make sure that our schools are safely open. I have received a flood of emails in the last 24 hours from staff that I think is also a testament to how dedicated our staff is to ensuring safe and rigorous learning for all of our students. And the following is a synthesis of a lot of the teacher messages I've been asked to share directly with you. A number of teachers wrote about how they love their jobs and how they want to be back in person, interacting in full classrooms every day, but that the virus is simply too dangerous for too many people for more in-person learning to be feasible at this time. At the same time, many messages expressed confidence in the rigorous remote learning that we were giving to our students that covers the same material as we would give in an ordinary year. Teachers also expressed frustration and disbelief about the idea that we're not fully utilizing our remote Wednesdays to teach our students, including one who wrote, quote, "We have meetings, we do planning, and we grade work. This is in addition to working nights and weekends to get all of our work done. Wednesday is the day when I meet one-on-one or in small groups with students who need extra help. My students seek out virtual help more than they ever sought out in-person help in the past. I set up my whiteboard at my house and I'll spend 30 to 45 minutes with each student. Wednesday time has been invaluable and I cannot imagine what my students would do without access to this time for extra help," end quote. A lot of teachers have expressed dismay that in a school year during which we've been so flexible in giving up our personal lives for our teaching, another change might be thrown at us. And this is a change that we think would further disrupt student learning and the sense of normalcy that we've worked so hard to cultivate in our classrooms. Another teacher wrote, quote, "I'm too exhausted to defend myself for giving everything I have in me to keep the children I'm charged with keeping physically safe, mentally healthy, and academically growing. Too exhausted to be a voice that may be ignored. Every last ounce of energy I have will continue to be channeled towards my students' needs and the needs of my school team. To ask staff and students to adapt to yet another schedule and to erode the preparation and planning time that this would entail would disrupt learning for students and devastate an already frayed morale among our teachers." Finally, one last quote. "I want to address the parents in the community who are concerned about the effect this year is going to have for their children's long-term academic development. I understand those concerns because I have them about my own children. Here's what I can tell you. Your children are learning. They are getting good instruction. Teachers are working harder than they ever have, and we always work hard. In my classes, the students are learning to be better readers and writers. They are also learning to be flexible, resilient, compassionate, and independent. Skills that will carry them even further than the lessons learned in a typical school year. I'm sure this is because parents, like teachers, are working harder than ever to help their children learn. That extra effort is paying off. Thank you again for your dedication and service to our students."
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Kierans, Cumberland Center. I'm also a parent to a 4th and 5th grader at GMS and a 3rd grade teacher at MIW. I can appreciate the desire to have kids back in school 5 days a week. I want that as a parent and as an educator. I yearn for normalcy in my classroom, and I see disappointment every Tuesday afternoon when I ask my own kids to put their lunchboxes away, as they won't be used again for another week. I understand where this national and local push is coming from. The current hybrid model is not equitable, and it's not ideal. I have never worked longer hours and felt less satisfied. It's exhausting work for everyone involved, parents, staff, and students. Despite this instructionally flawed model, I know that it is the safest model that allows for in-person instruction. Almost a year ago, educators were thrown into a novel situation: teach students fully remote. This was hard, as we didn't have the tools we needed, time and training. 6 months later, a new school year begins, and teachers are yet again being asked to try something completely unfamiliar. Teach 4 days a week in person, while also creating 3 days worth of lessons for remote instruction. This is also hard. We quickly realized we wouldn't have the tools we needed: planning time. When K-3 schedules were created for this year, the student day was shortened, but the teacher day was actually increased due to the amount of time arrival and dismissal takes, about 45 minutes each. Teacher lunches were also shortened, as we were expected to supervise lunches in our classrooms. These and other changes resulted in significant losses of planning time, about 3 to 4 hours a week for K-3 teachers. Remote Wednesdays were proposed as a way of accounting for some of that lost planning time, to help be a tool to make the hybrid model work. Wednesdays are not just about planning time, though, and are certainly not a day off for teachers. Wednesdays are also days to look at data to inform instruction, 504 and RTI meetings, and team meetings, which cannot be scheduled at all during our in-person days. Most Wednesdays, I have 4+ hours of Google Meets before I can count on any instructional planning time. Wednesdays are full of so many important things. They are essential to my practice and the single most powerful tool that makes the hybrid model somewhat manageable. Even with Wednesdays, I am working nights and weekends. There are days I am barely managing it, and there are some days my own children are barely managing. I get it, I really do. But I'm not sure the trade-off of having students go possibly one more day every other week, which would add up to a handful of days, maybe 6 or 7 for the rest of the school year, would truly improve anything. And as a teacher, I would really be feeling the loss of that tool. I'm sharing this information with you so you can better understand what work happens on Wednesdays. This year at K3, almost 90% of a student's in-person school day is spent with their classroom teacher. There simply isn't enough teacher planning time during our 4 in-person days to get everything accomplished for our hybrid model to be successful. Returning to 5 days will be amazing when the fog lifts. We just aren't quite there yet. In the meantime, remote Wednesdays are an essential part to our hybrid model, and one I hope the board and our parent community will continue to support. I am proud of our district leadership and proud of my students and what we have accomplished so far. We are still very much in a pandemic, but we are still very much in it together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Joan Guild from Cumberland, and I'm also the president of the MSAD 51 Education Association. School board members, I want to first address that no one wants to be in person more than the educators. The educators of this district dedicate their lives to help students succeed, and teachers haven't stopped that dedication to the students in learning this year, despite the blocks and challenges that this global health crisis has dealt us. We want the parents here and watching at home to know how deeply committed the educators are to the students and also empathetic to their wanting their students to be back in school. I also want to secondly commend the district's health and safety team. With expertise and guidance, the district has adhered to CDC and Maine DOE requirements for the last 6+ months. And because of this leadership and decision-making, we have avoided widespread outbreaks, not because there isn't a real threat of harm, but because we work constantly to socially distance, to ensure, air filtration and flow and limit close contacts and large group exposures. Thank you for continuing to recognize the very real risks staff take every day we are in the buildings, and thank you for keeping the health and safety of our community at the forefront of your decision-making. If we could wave a magic wand and make this all go away, believe me, we would. Instead, we will continue to work in our current situation. We do hope the district will prioritize discussion around post-pandemic planning rather than taking away the protections that we are working so hard to keep in place. For short-term adjustments, I ask you and the parents listening tonight to help us advocate for teachers to be prioritized for vaccination. This may enable us to open up sooner and faster. And finally, I leave you with one more ask. On behalf of teachers and staff, before you make any decisions that impact classrooms or require us to readjust once again, please ask for our input, which I understand that that's part of the plan going forward this spring. But we ask that we avoid further disruption to what we have already done this year. So thank you very much for all of your work.
Thank you. All right, I'm seeing no other people. Everybody has left. Thanks for staying until the end and sharing your thoughts with us. This is a big agenda for this evening. So we're going to move on to superintendent's report. Jeff?
Do you want to do it, or do you want to skip it?
Can we skip it?
You can skip it.
Okay. Awesome. And we will fly through some committee reports, and then we will move into our workshop. And I just want to say, Madison, after committee reports, if you would like to go home, that would be totally fine.
Part of my report is the calendar, so I do have to do it.
Okay, I thought that was a little strange.
I'm not going to do the rest of the report.
Okay, the report, but we are going to do the first reading of the calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So tonight I'm presenting the first read of the calendar for your consideration, and you'll obviously there's a second read that will be coming up. Apologize, I want to get the calendar up here on the screen. All right, sorry about that. So I want to present the first read of the calendar and just kind of talk through the calendar, what we have. This calendar is making an assumption that we are in green next year, that the district is back in a more typical schedule in September, and this calendar will reflect it. The other piece I just want to mention is that anytime we have a school district calendar, a good portion of it is decided before the district even looks at it specifically. And that's because I work with 9 other superintendents who have students who attend the Portland Arts and Technology High School, and we have to have no more than 5 dissimilar days amongst us. So this calendar calls for 3 staff days next year prior to the beginning of the school year. This was set, the first day of school was set by the region, which would be September 1st. There would be 2 student days that week, and then a 4-day break, which is actually what we have done for many, many years. So that we'd be bringing that back for the holiday weekend. You will also see that there are several staff days throughout the year, as we typically have. There's one in October, there's one in March, and the actual parent-teacher conference schedule has been changed. We typically have had parent-teacher conferences, and we have allowed for a flex day at the end of the school year. We are doing parent-teacher conferences more typically as we've done them this year, which is to provide early release time for staff to do that, and we've built that into the calendar. So that flex day has been removed from the calendar, which is a change. We've been able to also add in a staff day at the beginning of the year. We typically only have 2, but because of the change in the conference schedule, we were able to add in 3 days. Which I know more time before school starts for staff is very important. The purple days are early release days, and you'll see that that looks more like a typical school year schedule, and having early release days pretty much on any week that is not or that is a full week and doesn't have any sort of interruption in there. So pretty much this schedule will look more typical than not in terms of the beginning and most of the other features of the schedule in there. So I don't know if there's any questions. I have some other talking points, but I don't know if there's any questions about the actual calendar itself.
I have a question. Just because it's late and I'm starting to lose it a little bit. Will there be snow days?
Good question. Very good question. Very good question. So there's an indicator at the bottom,
I
And
just
it
saw that.
basically says that, you know, the first 2 days would be a more traditional snow day. And then after the first 2 days, we would be doing a red day for any other days after the 2 days. So first 2 days we would make up at the end of the year. We would add those to the calendar. And so if you approve the calendar that way, or if you want to adjust that language, that's in there. But we had tried for that this year and we never ended up doing it. And so it's kind of built into the calendar here as well. There are 176 student days, which is typical for a normal year that we have, a more typical year.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions or comments? I know it's just a first read, so when will we be looking at this again, Jeff?
At your next meeting for a second read. And there's some talking points that I don't believe I shared with the board, and I can certainly just send it to you at this point.
You did.
I did, okay,
Yep.
it was in your packet. So it's just something that, you know, if there's any questions about the talking points and the why around this calendar and why it is looking more like a school year calendar, just please feel free to ask me, or if you want to email me questions or ask me now, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. All right, I'm seeing no questions or discussion. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to committee reports, and then we can move into our workshop. So first is finance, which is Kevin.
I had what I needed up in front of me. So here's where we are. We continue to do quite a bit of work on the budget. There's nothing to see back there. There's continue to do work on the budget. We have shifted the superintendent's budget, rather. I think that the superintendent and the finance director have done a fine job of making it easy for us to understand their priorities. At this point of the process, it's a little bit lumpy, and my colleagues on the committee, Jennifer and Tyler, have been asking all the right questions at the right time. We will be moving forward with our next meeting is on the 9th, next Tuesday, for anybody playing along. This is going to be to get ourselves prepared for the presentation to you the week following on the 15th. Am I missing anything that I should be talking about? No? Thank you.
Thank you. Policy, Anne?
I have no update. We meet again on the 15th.
Okay, thank you. Facilities, Peter?
Jeff has sent out a outline of what's going to be proposed to happen. I think everybody's seen it. The key right now for March is that we're going to be having the meeting with the teachers, and then Oak Point is going to be going forward during the rest of the month developing their plan.
Thank you, Peter. Curriculum, Mike?
No update at this time.
Okay, thank you. Student reports, Madison?
I mean, we've talked a lot about like mental health and COVID concerns. I've just noticed a lot of my peers are really stressed about COVID right now. I've noticed a lot more people have started like double masking and getting really strict about like, don't come near me, please back away. Like a lot of, at least juniors in high school, I've noticed are getting really concerned. So it's to hear a lot of the public comment tonight be like, no, we want everyone to go back. It's concerning for me as someone that also cares a lot. You know, I social distance with most of everyone except for one person. So it's like, it's kind of stressful to think that like there's a possibility that we'll all be back. And I know that a lot of my peers feel the exact same, that like they don't want to have that anxiety of like, there's so many students around me all the time. I don't know who has COVID, who doesn't, who has symptoms, who doesn't. Like, it's just, it's a lot of stress around that, which also can damper your mental health. But that's all I really have to talk about, which we talked about a lot today anyways.
Thank you for sharing. And then we do have the opportunity to give some ad hoc committee reports, and I believe Anne was going to give an update on the equity committee.
Yeah, I just wanted to report out that Our subgroup of the Equity Committee have completed 3 sessions with the USM Southern Maine Partnership. We also have another small subgroup, a duo, who will be working on drafting an equity policy for the district with the goal of bringing that to the board before the end of this school year. We are brainstorming ways for parents and community members to engage in self-directed learning on systemic racism and oppression, including offering suggested resources available at Prince Memorial Library. And then, Jeff, since you've been attending the USM meetings, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think the sessions are actually Tyler has been attending
Yeah, I
as
just
well.
wasn't able to attend last week.
Yep, we started getting into questions to ask yourself as you're developing a plan for your district.
Awesome.
And that was kind of the last session. It was that transition into how do we develop a plan, and what are some of the broad framework questions that we've got to answer in order to get the community involved in developing it. And actually, we talked about policy. That was very important, having a policy. Actually, that was said several times during this session, that the board needs to adopt a policy that can be agreeable to the community and is the direction forward for your district. That was a really important step that they harped on.
That's great, because that's one of our board goals as well for this year. So that's great to hear that that's the conversation. That is all for committee reports. We do not have any items for action. We've already done our second public comment, so we now will move into a workshop, which, Andy, that is your cue for no longer having to record. So I